Hello, Orville Nation. We have a very, very special treat for you all tonight. Let me introduce our co-host George Peter Gatsis,
Greetings,
and part of our panel, John Talks, Comics Division,
Hey.
and our. Sorry, guys, I didn't let you guys even talk.
It's all right.
And our very, very special guest, the man who Stan Lee called a genius, the man who ran Spider-Man and Hulk, and the gentleman who is launching Meta Studios tonight, Paul Jenkins. Thank you, Paul, for coming.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
I think it's it's gonna be a very relaxed, friendly atmosphere, but I think that it's best to start at the beginning. So I want to ask you, what was it like for you growing up in the UK, and what was Paul's childhood like?
What was it like for you? That's funny. We have a technical difficulty, guys. Hang on one second. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. It's PJ.
PJ, you disappeared.
Okay, well, PJ's question was, what was home like before you became, and before you ventured out, before that moment when you were laying down on the grass and they were looking up saying, this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a little kid, obviously my brother and I had to deal with the difficulty of being on a farm, being kind of deprived. We didn't have things like electricity, and we struggled for food. And my brother and I would walk to school a couple of miles to get to school every day because my mum couldn't afford the bus fare. So you come from a difficult situation like that, and you would think that made you unhappy, but there is so much of that part of my life that has come into my work. For example, and I'm going to be doing this a lot with our YouTube channel. I wrote in an issue of Hellblazer when I was working on Hellblazer. I wrote an issue. It's actually issue number 97, and it's about where John Constantine goes into a forest in the middle of the night. And the idea would be that if you walk into a forest in the middle of the night, if you confront your fears, then when you leave the forest on the other side, you've left some of your fears behind, right? So Constantine goes into this forest at a pivotal moment in his life, and he runs into a gypsy, and the gypsy is a shepherd. And one thing that was really important to me, and by the way, this is probably almost, and I do not know this is possibly an exclusive for Orville Nation, so bear with me if anybody cares. Back in Swamp Thing 88, which some people may be aware of, George, I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes, I'm aware of your works very well, sir.
Yeah, well, in Swamp Thing 88, Alan Moore had written a story in which Swamp Thing meets Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
Yes.
And DC canned it and said, they actually canned it right at the last second and said, we are not willing to print this because we think it might be offensive to, say, Catholics, right?
Yes.
And I was friends with Alan. Obviously, I was his editor for a number of years. And I was very friendly with Rick Veitch, and I was very friendly with Steve Bissett and all the people John Toltman, all the people that worked on Swamp Thing. And I never really understood how John Constantine was allowed to go and talk to the devil and have a beer with the devil, but couldn't even mention Jesus Christ. So that story, issue 97, is actually John going into a forest and he meets an old gypsy who happens to be a shepherd. And it's obviously Jesus, right? So I actually did the story the first time that Jesus appeared in another DC comic, right?
Yes.
Now that guy who is the gypsy is actually a real person in my life. And even though we went through some difficult stuff, I sort of defy anyone who's ever seen a European badger. You're never going to see one, but I've had one walk around my feet at 2:30 in the morning. So my mom would wake me up and I would go out with the old gypsy and sit in a moonlit forest and with the snow on the ground and have, you wait about an hour and the boy will come out. So I was raised, in a difficult position, but we knew all the gypsies. I can tell you all of the gypsy lore, like why swallows fly high in the summer, and how you avoid getting hurt by a stinging nettle, all of that stuff, because I was raised that way. So there was so much value in it. And in that story, John Constantine sits with the with the gypsy, and they talk about the badger and the fox and all of these things that were all part of my life. So there's difficulty in it, but from that difficulty, like any comedian will tell you, you bring sort of something to the fore, you know?
That's absolutely fascinating, because I long wondered about many writers, and you have just hit the nail on the head on one of my questions that I was thinking about asking you, and that is, how did you learn to tell a story? Because right now, from everything that I've seen and heard so far, is you've taken a lot of your experiences and distilled them into a narrative. But where did you learn? I mean, where did your self-teaching, I'm assuming, come from?
Well, partly it's self-teaching, and partly it's to do with what I wanted to do when I was in college, what I wanted to do when I was even in high school. So it's funny that I ended up working in comics, because I'm really not a big comic book fan, and that just drives everybody crazy. I don't know that much about them. I don't read them very often. Now, that would be really annoying to a lot of people who love them. And by the way, I do love them. I love the medium. I love the way that stories can be told using comics, but I'm not a big consumer of that type of entertainment, right? And partly it's because I feel like my life is very interesting, and that I would much rather live my life than read my life. You know, I don't want to read other people's stuff. And one of the reasons why I feel like I had some success at Marvel, especially initially with like Inhumans and the Sentry and some of these projects that they let me kind of rebuild, was that I didn't read a lot of comics. I wasn't stuck in it. So I would say, George, the answer to your question, you know, where do stories come from? What is a writer is a great question. You know, what is a writer? And to me, maybe a writer is someone that knows how to look at the world and then describe what they see and what they feel. It's as simple as that. Does it have to be any more complicated? Now, was I self-taught? Perhaps. Certainly, I'm not a very good typist. I actually look down, you know, I get a bad neck because I can't type without looking at the keyboard. I mean, and you figure out how prolific I am, and yet I still can't type. But I think I type at the speed that I think. And, you know, I live, and then I try to describe the things that I see. That's as simple as that. And so, you know, it's hard to know where it comes from. Harlan Ellison used to say, yeah, I get all my ideas from a mail order catalog I order from Cleveland.
Well,
Welcome, Anti-Trucker.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Anti-Trucker, welcome.
Hey, what's up, Anti-Trucker?
Sorry, I had some technical problems. I did not even realize. So when you sent the link out for the StreamYard, it never showed up in my Twitter. And then I closed the browser, reopened it, and it was there. So I apologize.
Wonderful. Well, Paul, it sounds to me you're more of a storyteller than a writer. And I think the world has enjoyed that much more happiness through your works. Yeah, you know, one of the questions that has always been fascinating to me is that you have such a huge talent stack. And how do you transition from one discipline to the next? You know, I understand you have a go-getting drive to try something new, to grab that opportunity, but to transition yourself from one discipline, one job opportunity to the next one, is it learning on the spot? I don't want to lead your questions or your answers.
No, it's a great question. I would probably put it like this, right, George? I was recently on a panel. Actually, last year, it was on like a video game convention, and what they did was they put all the people like me with white beards on, you know, and they said, okay, you've been in the entertainment business, in gaming or whatever, for 20 plus years, right? And they put 5 of us on the panel. They said to a bunch of students that were basically from the local universities, they said, okay, tell these people the thing, you know, what is it that keeps you working in this business? And every single one of us looked at each other and said, well, it's pretty obvious, which is work ethic, right? Yeah. So it's a little bit of my rehashed college lecture, and I apologize for this, but you'll hear me say it quite often, that really I struggle to think that there's any such thing as talent, because talent is really just potential. That's the way that I tend to put it, you know, and if you add that hard work and maturity to it, then it becomes talent. right? So how do I skip between disciplines? Well, I work hard and I learn those disciplines and I understand things about, I might have a brain. If I have a talent, it might be that I have a brain that remembers things. Great. Okay. Beyond that, how do I use that? Well, what I try to do is I try to understand what are the elements of game design that could work, and where do we have audacity in design and storytelling? I often felt that the problem that I would see in mainstream comics, for example, would be there's no audacity in storytelling. There's no audacity when stuff blows up and people punch each other really hard. It would be very audacious to put two people in a coffee store and put them on for 6 pages of sitting over a cup of coffee. Can you write that and can you draw that? Because if you can and you can sustain somebody's interest, that would be much more bold than having a bunch of fighting. So I feel like it's hard work and the application of sort of like a social maturity that allows us, those of us who've had a modicum of success, to continue to sustain that success. And the second part of it, I would say, is that, how do I do it? If I have a talent, I've got 2 talents. One of them is that my brain can switch just like that. I don't know why, but if you put me on a roller coaster and then at the top of the roller coaster, you suddenly stopped it and handed me a piece of paper and said, write me 2 pages on the inside of a ping pong ball, I'd go, great, got it. And I would do it. Right? The other talent is if I'm playing golf and someone putts the ball, no matter how far away it is, I know if it's in and I can say that's in and it will go in. That's all I got.
Nice.
I can tell you're not kidding either.
I'm not kidding. I can do that. I swear. If I say it's going in, even from 50 feet away. And everybody's like, how do you do that? Like, that's my talent, apparently. So
well, that's wonderful. I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to crowd the audience here. So up first is Comics Division. Please go ahead and ask.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot. Next person, man. I got to think of a question.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to the next.
Actually, I do have something. There was something I was kind of thinking about earlier. So I've kind of noticed something in common with really good writers is that I wouldn't say there's like a point of personal pain, but there's like something that has happened in their life, good or bad, that has been very interesting that they're able to draw upon. With Tolkien, it's World War One. It seems like that a lot of the great comic writers and writers in general have something. They have all this life experience where they can draw upon. And it seems like with modern writers these days, they don't necessarily have that experience. They haven't experienced the world like, the previous generations have. So it seems like their stories tend to fall flat more.
I'd probably be inclined to agree. I don't know if there's a way to make any kind of sweeping judgment this generation or any of that kind of stuff. I don't know, right? That's for other people to decide. What I can say is that I did a book last year called Alters, or a couple of years ago. And Alters was a very difficult book to kind of write because it was about people who had a superpower. And they're getting it. It's kind of like a mutant power. They get it. But all of the people who get it are people who have a disadvantage in society. Mm-hmm. So it might be that you're marginalized. It might be that you're homeless. It may be that you are trying to work out a physical issue, a mental health issue. And these people get the superpowers. And what was interesting about the story was that you would have a person with a disadvantage and a person with like a hyper advantage, and it would clash in the middle at the human being that lived there, because that's always what we're writing about, is the people. Mm-hmm. The main character of that book was a young transgender woman, right? And what happened in the middle of telling this story, very, very early, I could see this was going to happen anyway, was that a few people would say, I don't believe that middle-aged heterosexual white guy should be writing this book. To which, in part, my answer would be, yeah, but, should Shakespeare then have written Othello? I mean, if I write who I am, then you get a lot of stories about a middle-aged dude that likes playing video games and golf and can call a putt when it goes in.
Right.
What else, can I only write me? I didn't think so. But I very much understood why, especially the trans community, were a bit wary. But what was happening with that book was that I was showing that book to 6 trans people who were helping me write it the best that I could. And the reason I bring that story up is that at the end of the second arc, the first arc was primarily focused on Chalice, and she's the trans woman. And the second was about a mom who has 2 kids, and she's homeless. And I would do interviews at the back of each of the book, and I would actually interview people who were like trans, and and then they would tell me, you know, and I would say, well, what have I learned this month, you know, and I would tell the audience the things that I had learned as a writer about issues with transgender experiences and so on. And I felt that transgender, that the metaphor was the secret identities and all that kind of stuff, which is why heroes work very well. And at the end of issue 10, I said, you know, I wrote my own editorial, and I said, well, who am I? Who am I to talk about this or schizophrenia or homelessness? Well, let me tell you, I've been homeless twice, and it's no fun. And then when I was able to explain to people how it feels to be raised in a difficult environment, or to be without electricity, or to be incredible, like the poorest kid I've ever met was me, right? And so did I have to come out like that? Was there some like requirement? And I can understand exactly some of the difficulties that people who are dealing with issues of their sexuality with their family or something, why should they come out? You know, they should be allowed their life. You know, do I have to come out as a heterosexual? No, I don't. And so I got to get a small sense of like the difficulty that people were dealing with. But I will say that the pain, or whatever you describe it as, it's not really pain, because I didn't feel it as much. I'm sure it was there. But I do think that the experiences were some things that were really important. So tons of my work is about living in two worlds, because I have been seen as a guy that's very successful, but I come from a place that has absolutely no opportunity whatsoever. Mix those two things together, and that's why I write about living in two worlds all the time.
That's interesting.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Comics division, do you have a follow-up?
No, not this time.
Okay, JT, you're up.
Paul, I'm just curious when it comes to writing. And my question is not gonna. I'm gonna try to save or think of a deep question for later on. But this one's gonna be more basic. What you know, in terms of structuring a story, do you have an idea, or do you structure your stories? Like, do you have kind of like a 3-act structure, or do you think of it that way, or do you just put the pen to the paper and just go and not look back, and kind of where it concludes?
I'm searching for like some of my workbooks here, so you see the madness, right? Because I'm like the crazy guy in the movie Seven, right? I write little tiny writing. I write like these manifestos inside my workbooks. So let's see. Look at this page, for example. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is a giant page of writing for one issue of a digital storytelling comic book kind of thing. And then if you...
Paul, can you show us that again? Yes. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so here's the page by page breakdown that I do.
Awesome.
So I will write out the story. Let me just kind of show you that again. You know, I'll write out the story like that. You can see all the madness there. I'm sure people will screen capture it now and see if they can decipher it. Good luck. and then it gets translated to a page by page. So
cool. That's cool.
I like to think of myself as one of the most prepared people in terms of writing. When I do a screenplay, I do a minute-by-minute breakdown, and those minute-by-minute breakdowns are incredibly precise. I take 1 minute, and I literally bullet point every single thing that should happen in terms of pacing within that minute. You know, when we look at a 3-act structure in a film, we're also looking at something I think is really important, which is how long does that first act get to unfold? Because I'm telling you right now, it better be 20 to 25 minutes or some time around there. There are ways to break those rules, but if you don't say in 20 minutes what the end of that first act is, you may not have people sustain throughout like 40 minutes. They're not going to stay with your main character if they don't know what the problem is. So if you don't like the 3-act structure and the 20-minute rule, 20 minutes from the end, you get them to their point of emphasis. If you don't like it, don't write screenplays, because you're not going to be making films. So I adhere to those structures quite a lot, you know. And I feel that like being prepared and writing out my stuff and knowing what I'm going to write before is really important, because I will be honest, I know a few creators, or quite a lot of creators, that just type and see what happens. And I'm just amazed and slightly appalled by that, because I don't get it. But that, you know, I actually studied English in college, and you know, I actually understood story structure and stuff. So I don't get it, especially the comic industry, guys. It's a hobbyist industry, and I think that's a shame, because you know, we should be doing better, you know.
Wow, that's great to know. Because I read books on screenwriting, and I read, you know, just on writing in general, and a lot of it, the stuff that I gravitate towards is like you were saying, the importance of structure and, kind of that idea of like those plot points hitting around, like the 25, 27 minute mark or, so that's kind of interesting that you were actually bringing up screenwriting too, because, it's weird because everybody's got their own like different process, but that kind of, I think that's encouraging to, just to maintain the importance of structure when it comes to writing and in that, because I do think it helps me in terms of like a guideline, rather than just kind of wandering in the dark sometimes. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we should consider as well is, when people are writing screenplays, oftentimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, I'm on my screenplay, and you say, well, okay, how long have you been on it? And they'll go 9 months, 6 months, and I'm like, man, I can't afford that. Last one I wrote took me 10 days.
Wow.
That's impressive.
That's
now the structure of it, the minute by minute breakdown took me a couple of weeks, but it was get it all ready and then just disappear. Go into the office. My wife and kids don't see me for 10 days. I come out like smelling really bad, like head on fire. Go, look, I've invented a screenplay. But I like to think that those first drafts are usually pretty good, and it's because of the attention to detail and structure.
If I can ask a follow-up to John's question, Paul, do you have a lot of people say that Seth MacFarlane brings his animation expertise and his work ethic to the filming. And unlike a lot of other shows that are being filmed, everything is all set when they begin filming for the season. And instead of on another show, like another show they may be still writing episode 4 while they're filming episode 1. But Seth has it all worked out for the whole season. Do you have any comments on bringing that ethic to?
Absolutely. Well done, Seth. That's kind of the point, right? That's like literally where I'm coming from. I don't understand. I sometimes get into these situations where someone will say, especially in Los Angeles, can I do a project for them? And I go, yeah. And they say, okay, per 11-minute episode, you get 16 weeks. I'm like, what, 16 weeks to write an 11-minute episode? How about 1 a day? How about 2 a day? You got to be kidding me, right? 16 weeks is our production cycle? No way. It's crazy. So the idea that I actually am struggling with the idea that you couldn't and shouldn't deliver it all in advance so you know where you're going. You know where you're going. And it kind of takes me back to, so let's, for example, let me talk about the origin of Wolverine, right? When I wrote the origin of Wolverine for Marvel, there was this kind of funny anecdote, which, we kind of show in the story that I sent to you guys. And one of the things that happened was that when I pitched the origin of Wolverine, which I actually didn't say on the thing that we were doing, one of the reasons why Marvel, I think, had not done the origin of Wolverine is because they didn't know why he had lost his memory. They didn't understand why. They had never created the origin. They'd never understood where they were going. So they were in limbo. For 35 years, you got some guy walking around scratching his head saying, I don't remember my past. And I guess we have that question, why didn't you have that prepared? Like, why am I pitching to you the idea that you're supposed to have had? And so that's frustrating to me. In fact, I just said to Marvel, well, I thought the whole idea of this was that, he has a healing factor. So he cuts himself and it heals. And I just thought that he had a PTSD or something and his brain healed. Just fixed itself and he couldn't remember. That's what happened. It was like it papered over the cracks. And they said, I can't believe you. Brilliant. You're a genius. Couldn't you guys have thought of that?
Well, that's amazing. It sounds like you've learned the discipline or the rules and regulations for script coverage and how to get your story past the front gate, so to speak. Was that a give and take process? I mean, did it take you a little while to figure out that on page 60 you have to have your second biggest action sequence and all those little rules and regulations?
Well, I don't adhere to the whole script coverage thing anyway. I've got to say, like, a lot of time you get coverage, and who's actually giving you coverage is the important thing. I'd much rather have my script covered by people who I have a relationship with, not because they will say yes to the things I'm writing in a script, but because I can trust their responses, right? So in the standard kind of coverage scenario, you send it out for coverage and someone gets, say, let's say that I write a comedy like Shaun of the Dead, right?
Yes.
And we've got this great script that I know is going to be implemented a certain way. It's going to be great. We're going to do it. I'm going to direct it like Edgar Wright. I hope I'm going to use some of those great ways that he, like kind of use some of his methods and really pay attention to detail to make that not a silly American comedy, respectfully, sorry, but American comedies is literally over the shoulder stuff, right? It's literally two people over the shoulder, put Will Ferrell on and then just, say something funny, right? Like that's rubbish. It needs to have some craft behind it. So that's the way that film is going to get made. But if someone is reading it for coverage and they're just like resentful because they want to be a writer and they haven't gotten any traction and all that kind of stuff, then I think that's the bit that will really frustrate others. So I don't really adhere too much to script coverage because I don't trust the people that are providing it to me. I trust a select group of people that I know. Even if I send them a script and it's not working, they'll tell me in a second. But at least I can trust the actual creative process there.
Nice.
Paul, the Wolverine file that you want to explain what we're looking at here? What is this?
Yeah, are you gonna play this little clip, or are we? Or
I wasn't sure if we could actually play the audio or not. Can we?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I suggest just in case YouTube goes cuckoo crazy, talk over it. Let us know what's going on.
I can do that. Well, I don't know specifically what I'm saying, but are you going to play this from the beginning and we can give it a shot?
Sure. Okay.
So in general terms here, this is part of what we're doing on the Meta Studios YouTube. Obviously we're starting to put content. This is one that will come later. And what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about the specific personal stories behind some of these projects that I've worked on, because I've worked on hundreds of them. Here's the origin of Wolverine. So this is me talking about it. And what I was saying here is generally that, I lived on a farm as a little kid. I lived at the bottom of the hill. We didn't have any electricity. It was freezing cold. There's nothing quite so great. The best way to sleep at night, guys, is with a hot water bottle, which I happen to actually have one. My wife was using it. You fill it with hot water, you put it on your feet, and it makes you nice and warm. So I was the kid at the bottom of the hill looking up at the farmhouse. I could play with the farmers' kids, but I wasn't allowed to go to their birthday parties. And so when you see the origin of Wolverine, you see the character of Dog, the kid at the bottom of the hill, you see the farm. That was my life. That was my childhood. And, at the end of the night, one of the characters says, Dog has to go back to his house, and they go up to the giant house on the hill. And so the very first issue of Wolverine Origin was called The Hill. And it was about me and my brother having to look up at this farmhouse with the lights blazing and realize we didn't even have any electricity or heat.
Fascinating. Wow. Absolutely fascinating. There's no way to segue to the out of this because it's such heartbreaking and such incisive. Next person we have is Anti Trekker. He's a wonderful man. Loves Star Trek. That's why he's calling himself Anti Trekker. Anti.
Yes, it's true. I do love Star Trek, and yes, I call myself the Anti Trekker. Paul, it's an honor to meet you, and I want to ask you a little bit because as someone who I will tell you, my biggest stickler when I'm talking about just about anything is writing. Writing to me is the core of the visual medium, and people just kind of lose touch with that. You talked earlier about your interviewing and talking to people that were going through transgender in order to properly write about people who were going through transgenderism, and that's exactly what I believe you should do. But what we've been seeing lately, and at least to me, is a rash of writers going into existing franchises and basically trying to change the franchise to fit them, as opposed to learning about the franchise in order to continue on in the same vein of where it's going. So I'm curious what you think of that, as far as, do you think, like, for example, let's say CBS hired you tomorrow and you're going to start writing a new Star Trek series, would you then want to start learning the lore of Trek before you start writing it, or are you going to start writing it and then just add in Trek stuff as you go?
Well, I tell you what, my answer might not be exactly what I think you might be looking for, but bear with me, because in fact it will end up being the answer that you want.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not looking for a specific answer. I'm just curious your insights.
I'm just prefacing it because I think that you'll be interested to see how I've approached it and what I think it has value, right? So I've got two things from comics that would probably help you to understand where I come from. The first thing is that when I did the Inhumans, they called me up and they said, hey, we've loved your work for a long time. Would you consider working on superheroes? And I said, yeah, great. And they said, great, brilliant. So how would you feel about doing the Inhumans? And I said, that sounds wonderful. And I have no idea who they are. And they said, great. And they sent me 2 5-page Jack Kirby stories, kind of a legendary story now, 2 5-page stories. And I said, don't send me any more because I get it. Right? I get it. Now, that to me wasn't me understanding the lore of the Inhumans. In fact, it was actually trying to understand the essence of the Inhumans. Make sense?
Yes.
I don't know if I was to write for CBS and Star Trek that I would need to see every single episode. In fact, I would probably discourage myself from doing it. But I would want to care very much about the essence of Star Trek. What do I think it's about? Where does it come from? Why does it speak to the fans? Now let me fast forward to a couple of years later. We'd had this success, and Marvel had asked me to write Spider-Man for 3 years, and I had turned them down. I'm that idiot, right? And the reason I turned them down was because I said, I don't get it. You guys are so convoluted. It doesn't make any sense to me. Every time I turn around, there's a clone saga and a thing and all this stuff, and all this layers and additions and things that I personally don't understand. I don't get it. And if I don't get it, you don't want me writing it. And so finally one day I realized that a great story for me to write would be Peter Parker. And this is actually the first 3 books that they were called Web Spinners. And Peter Parker looks at his life and says, this is too complex. It's too complicated. Somebody may or may not have died because of something that happened to me. And I look at all these deaths. Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Captain Stacy, and now they had in the main stories that Mary Jane at the time was dead, and he needed to unpeel these layers, and so he takes away all these layers, and they're like spider webs, and as he sleeps, they're covering him, and he unpeels them, and he takes away all this continuity until he goes right back to the beginning, and it's just him and the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus punching each other, and he's laughing and like, yeah, I'm finally back. And at that moment, Gwen Stacy walks out onto the rooftop where he is, and he's just standing there, and he sinks to his knees and he looks at her and he says, I'm really sorry. And he says, I want to wake up. And he says, I don't want to wake up. And she says, you have to, it's just a dream. And then he wakes up, and it's all this regret and stuff that's been built into him. And at that point, I knew what I wanted to say. And then I call up Mark Buckingham, and we start doing, I said, you know what, man, the reason that Spider-Man used to be a decent character was because he would make a joke and it would drive Dr. Octopus crazy. That's what you need to see in a Spider-Man book. Like, what happened to that? It's disappeared. Why can't we do funny jokes? Why can't he just turn around the corner and go, ha, screw you, and then disappear and like drive the Green Goblin and especially Dr. Octopus crazy? That's the essence of what makes us care about him. It's about a teenager trying to balance the difficult parts of his life. And at a certain point, it was clone sagas and Mary Jane's dead and everybody's dead. And I'm like, that's not the essence of it. So fast forward to like Star Trek, what would I do? Well, I would find the essence of why people loved it. Why did Roddenberry create it? Because he was post-war. He was trying to explain post-war world and his experiences and how the world was going to come to terms with forgiving Germany and Japan and trying to reassimilate those people. It was the most forward-thinking show. And I'm talking about the old Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
The original period. It was all about how we must work as a world. So the one thing I would say about that is that this was taking society and writing about it. And I would take today's society, which you see a lot of division, a lot of arguments about politics, a lack of trust, all the proliferation of social media, all the stuff that's done to sow the seeds of mistrust. And I would write about that in the framework of the original kind of style of Star Trek. That's what I would do. So I would change it. Sure, I wouldn't write the same story 50 times over.
Sure.
I would actually write something that reflected our society right now. But what I wouldn't change is the look and the pieces and the stuff that blows up and the ship designs and all that kind of stuff. It's like, that's just done for gratuitous reasons, I think, you know?
And did Trekker have a follow-up on this? Because that was awesome.
No, actually, I really like what you're saying, especially about the gratuitousness of just change for change's sake.
Yep.
That's something that I think has really plagued modern Trek in particular, and that's something that a lot of fans have gotten frustrated with. You know, it's like, if it's one thing, you know, Trek has always reflected our society, and that's something that's really been interesting about it. But if you're just trying to modernize something as opposed to you're trying to be a reflection of what's going on, then it just, you lose the essence of what made it great. And that's what's really missing. And I think that's where you really hit the nail on the head, is talking about capturing what is the essence of what made it. Why is it that these characters are so beloved, not just in Trek, but of course, with your experience in comics or with Star Wars or any franchise? What is it about this franchise that made people latch onto it, and how do we move that forward, as opposed to how do we make the explosions bigger and the ships look newer? And
yeah. And I also think that one thing that people don't understand, or they don't want to understand or try to understand, take a look at Spider-Man, right? I used to have this college lecture kind of thing again that would talk about, why don't we get to the essence of these characters? So let me give you my essence of Spider-Man. He is the guy who wakes up, has the flu, gets up, sits in the shower, doesn't feel very well. His wife's upset with him for some reason. The kids are already off at school. He sits in traffic for 2 hours. He gets there 2 minutes late. His boss yells at him. He gets back in traffic late. He drives. He's still got the flu. Gets home. His wife's upset. She's gone to bed. Dinner's in the dog. Kid's already asleep. And he goes to bed and does it all over again the next day. He's the guy that perseveres because he's ultimately a metaphor for us when we try hard, right? That's who Spider-Man is. And we don't.
You nail that so much that it's amazing, because I can't stand what Dan Slott did to Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, he is supposed to be the everyman, like you're saying, and it's just, you just nailed the essence of that character, and it's amazing how many people, how many writers have gotten that character wrong.
Well, and that's the whole point of Spider-Man, was all the way back to the beginning. He was the character that was everybody.
Right and wrong is subjective, right? And so it's very difficult to say who's right and who's wrong. That's not really where I would ever come from. Anyone can comment on my work and decide whether they like it or not, or whether it speaks to them. But I don't know if there's a right and a wrong. It's difficult to say that there is, to be honest, guys, because how do you do right and wrong, right? What's right? I mean, that's why I'm a guy. My business partners at Meta are not usually very happy with me, because I'm not an awards ceremony guy. I love to deal with fans. I love to even speak publicly, but I'm not an attention person, right? And so, you know, when you are in it for this right or wrong kind of reason, there is no right or wrong. It's all subjective, right? I don't understand how you can give an award to someone in a subjective medium, like, say, a movie. This is the best film. This is the best actor. The best? How do you manage to say best? By what criteria? Is the best? Stop it. Stop slapping yourself on the back, and just recognize that there's some incredible movies out there that all deserve recognition, you know? So, I mean, I think getting to the essence of a character and trying to understand it, that should be a fundamental requirement for how we do or getting to the essence of a theme, fundamental requirement for how we make our content. And I'm often amazed at how that goes by the wayside, because they want something impressive or something to explode. You know, what's the point of that?
Mm-hmm.
Paul, it sounds like you've experienced branding, marketing, and advertising through osmosis. Am I wrong?
Probably right. Yeah. You know, I started off with the Ninja Turtles. Remember, I was this third employee, I think. So, you know, when I came there, we had an office manager and a guy who had a few personal issues doing the licensing. So, you know, I kind of come in as a 20-year-old kid, and all of a sudden I'm helping run one of the biggest licenses of all time. And, you know, I learned about, you're either going to sink or swim. I've often said this, and I happen to be able to swim. I could do it. I learned it by osmosis, as you say, exactly. But what can you do, right? You have to kind of have confidence in what you create, and you have to work forward all the time. If you cave in, you you will cave hard, right? You'll lose your confidence and it won't work.
Right. PJ.
Paul, how did you connect with Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird of Ninja Turtles?
True story. I was in Massachusetts chasing a girl.
That's awesome.
And her dad didn't like me very much. He shot at me across Cape Cod with a gun to scare me.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, I met them. I'd come music and drama to learn disabled kids, and I went to Massachusetts. Met those guys. I was just like playing in a band. They did an album cover for me in my old band, and I knew them from town. And one day I heard that the show came on. I was like, hey, I should come work with you guys. And they're like, yeah, it sounds really good, man. We're really busy. And next thing you know, boom, it's the Ninja Turtles. It's crazy.
Wow.
Fantastic. Yeah, one thing that's what it sounds like is you're managing, or in the process of managing, many people around you and possibly across the world. What's the most challenging thing about this process of keeping or being the conductor in this huge orchestra of talent?
That's I really like that question, I got to say, because ultimately when you're at your most cynical, and when at Meta Studios, like I work with some great people, and we know it's all about the people, but there is another side to that, which is, as Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, said, hell is other people, right? So when things break and things go really badly, you can almost always attribute that to somebody else, unless you're clearly lazy and you're messing up and you're making all these mistakes, right? Usually our biggest challenges are other people. But so let's look at, say, recent directing gigs. So AXANAR, which is the Star Trek thing that I'm working on right now. We go on set. Our job is to make the best thing that we can make. To be prepared to have myself and our producer, Scott Conley, we have already done the work, and our other producer, Chris Mills, has got all the stuff lined up and all the people lined up. And here's my AD, Jenna, and she's amazing. And here's our script supervisor, Alicia, and she knows what she's. So everybody's ready to go like clockwork, because the first thing that will happen is something will explode. Right, here it goes. Here's the first thing that explode, and you're ready to be able to deal with it because you are prepared. Right now, you improvise. And one of the things that I found about directors when they're yelling on set, it's probably because they don't know what to do. And that's my feeling. I think people yell because they're scared and they've lost their confidence and they don't know what to do to solve a problem. I always feel like there's no problem I cannot solve. And so if you hit me with a problem, I say, great. And the measure of whether or not we're going to be making a good film is whether or not I'm able to have that attitude on day 20 when the 12th thing blows up. If I can keep that same attitude of, yeah, all right, no problem, let's go fix it, and we should be good. So how do you manage the people around that? Well, what I do is, personally, I just do it differently a little bit. I like people, and so I go to every person on my set, and I thank them genuinely for being involved in the film that I'm making. Like, without them, I can't make it. I can't make it without the script supervisor. I can't make it without the first AD and the producer. I certainly can't make it without the actors. And I really like actors, and it's my favorite thing to do. And I think actors really appreciate me because I studied to be an actor. Craft services, people running security outside, interns, like, I thank every single one of them genuinely because I really appreciate their work. If I'm going to do that from the top, if I'm going to be the first on set, and I'm going to be the last and the hardest working person, and also the happiest person and the most energetic. If I'm going to be able to do that, then I think that rubs off on other people.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. What it sounds like is you have actually understood the disciplines of the people that you're entrusting a particular job to. Mm-hmm. So that way, the process, you understand the craft, so that way when you're communicating with these different disciplines, you're able to talk on their language, not their level, their language.
Right.
Yep. And it's important to us, right? So at Meta, a big thing for us is, we do want to be able to kind of work with other people and see what they do. We want to be able to get people to, listen, everyone makes mistakes, right? So no one needs to be sitting there thinking, you know, what's going to happen to me if I mess up. At the same time, I would like everyone to have an expectation of professional excellence. You know, everyone makes mistakes. Try not to make them, please. And I learn my lectures as we go along. And I actually learned one recently. We had a situation in the AXANAR. It wasn't actually in the AXANAR production. It was Jonathan Lane, the guy from Fan Film Factor, had come in to make a film, and they had unfortunately, someone had uncovered one of our green screens and it got destroyed. And that, you know, we had left it there with a sign on it saying like property of Meta Studios, and it got destroyed, right? It was very expensive and very difficult, a difficult moment for everybody. And as I told Jonathan, pretend I've already shouted at you, man. Like, I can't take it back. It's already broken. Right, so let's just pretend that I've already yelled, where everyone's feelings are hurt. Now let's just solve the problem and see what we can do. And I explained to him, because I learned this to say this myself, was there are 4 kinds of problems: a small one, medium one, a large one, and a tragic one. A small one is someone was late. A medium one is, you know, whatever. A large one kind of is destroying a really big 20 by 100 foot green screen or a camera or something. And a tragic one would be someone dies on set. And so try not to make the small ones, because you never know when they become a large one, right? So we forgive people for mistakes, right? And we try to say, please don't keep doing them. That's all. Try to learn from it.
Nice.
Paul,
nice.
If I may, George,
Go
Paul,
ahead.
you mentioned AXANAR. Can you tell us how you got involved with AXANAR, with Alec and Trey and Stogie and everybody?
Yeah, man. Yeah. So AXANAR is a really interesting project because it speaks to me as a person, because I can't believe that those guys made that project, right? Like, they had nothing. The definition of a producer is that you make something, you produce something. And so I was introduced to Alec, and I told him genuinely, I was like, look, I understand that they've had some difficulties with fundraising and fans and all the stuff that have been difficult, right? But instead of that, I just said, man, I can't believe you made this film. Like, look at it. Looks great. Like, well done. You know, like, I mean, what can you say? You had nothing and you made this thing, and you got a bunch of people and great visual effects artists and sound design and editing, and you got, you know, actors in there and all kinds of people, and you made this short, and it blew up and people loved it, and they should, because you did that, man. So he said, you know, I would love it. I mean, I've got the scripts for the next 2. They had a settlement with CBS at that point, and they could make 2 15-minute episodes. And I said, you know, I'd love to have a look, man. So let me have a look. And I said, I got some thoughts. And then I wrote on the project. And I really fundamentally concentrated on character, which is what I'm known for. So I really wanted some things to come out, you know, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I certainly can give like one thing that I think is of interest. You know, I said to Alec, I think the thing that I'm missing now is in the second and third parts. It's like, why are these people here? Tell me about, like, what does it mean to this captain that he brought these people through, and why is he special? Tell me why he's special. And don't say it's because he has a really good catchphrase, because that doesn't mean anything. And don't even say it's because he won the Battle of AXANAR, because that doesn't mean anything either. You know, the worst story in the world is two people face each other and one guy punches the other guy harder and good guy knocks the bad guy out. That's not a story, and it's an event. Yeah. So what we did is we drilled to the base of Garth, and then the people there, we talked about PTSD. I related to my family's experience because, you know, most of my great-grandfathers are like at the bottom of a trench dead in the First World War. You know, they all, like, we're a family that gets shot first, you know. So we have a big connection to the military in my family. I wanted to bring that sadness and that trickle-down effect to AXANAR. And so once we could transform the way that story is told, and even it, you guys, especially Anti-Trekker over there, you'll probably really love the way that it resolves in this story, because it really, really speaks to the original series and the sense of optimism that came from that, you know, and connectivity. So that's what we're doing now with AXANAR. It's going to end and be presented not in a completely different way from the first one. We're using the same style and everything, but the message that it gives is very fundamentally story and character. And it just so happens there's space battles in the middle of it. Awesome. Take a look at these brilliant visual effects, right?
Just curious, are we going to see you as an actor? Oh, you can't talk about it. It's fine. It's fine.
Spoilers.
Okay,
fine.
we're gonna move on to
Forget the question.
You're not gonna see me as an actor in AXANAR, but you are gonna see me as an actor in something else. Yes. I
We'll
don't know.
move on this
I'm
question.
willing to play this clip, PJ, if you have it set up at all.
I can play that. Yeah, give me 1 sec. Yeah.
There you go. Set that clip up, and then we sent you that as a little gift. We at the last minute, after we had done all of the interviews for the day, a new character appears. Currently not appearing in this film. He's not going to be an AXANAR, but he's going to be in his own series. You let me know when you're set up. But yeah, I will actually act in it. And then also, Victoria Fox and Josh Irwin are making a film with Jonathan Lane, and they asked me if I would appear as an engineer. So I'm thinking about it right now. You know.
Well, PJ
Awesome.
is getting that set up. I just want to say, Uncle Ramus, I think, is saying what a lot of people are thinking. Why can't this guy run Picard for CBS All Access? So, I'm sure that it would be great if he did, but CBS just doesn't have that much wisdom in their corporate offices, unfortunately.
I tend to look at some of the things that CBS chose to do, and I'm okay with some of the ways that they do things. And I think imagine that the reason some of the fans are frustrated is, if the Klingons looked very, very different in Discovery, for example. I mean, I'm not gonna live or die by this, but you ask yourself, are those Klingons different for the sake of change, or are they different because it really means something to the way that the world works, right?
Right.
And so if the fans find out, or if they suspect that those things were changed because, someone wanted to put their editorial stamp on the Klingons, that's when the fans are going to react. And I went through that at Marvel. When I took over the Hulk, when I took over a couple of these other projects, they had allowed creators to come in and rewrite the origin stories, which was a bad idea, because those creators were trying to pretend that the origin stories were now their origin stories. That's not cool. Right. So you don't want someone to remake it in a way that they want, in an image that they want. All right. Now, are we able to play this with audio, or is it just me on camera?
How about?
let's
Do you want
try.
me to play? Do you want me to play with audio?
Go play it with audio, man.
Let's try.
Yeah,
Give me 1 sec. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's at the core of why so many of the fans were upset at Star Trek Discovery in particular. Not as much with Picard, but with Discovery, there was a lot of change for change's sake. The Klingon, the change in the appearance of the Klingons didn't really seem to serve a purpose other than to say, hey, look, they look like orcs now. The change in the look of the ships didn't serve any purpose other than to say, hey, they look different now.
Right. So it's somebody, a producer somewhere, saying we did that. It was we put our editorial stamp on this thing.
Exactly.
And I think that those kind of things can be destructive. Now, what I would say though is people can't deny that there's some really interesting stuff that happens. Opinions are divided, right? It's cool to me. It may not be as cool to you. What if I'm not a lifetime Star Trek acolyte? The captain in Discovery, and you guys are going to have to remind me what it is that he says, but when he does his thing where he says make it so, and or engage, I think he just says go, and I watched that and I thought that was really cool. I like that. Right. He's got to have his thing. I didn't have any issue with that. I thought that was actually pretty cool that they went for it,
Well, and I think
and I had
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I had a conversation with Alec Peters about what does Garth say, and I've got him to say it on camera.
Mm-hmm.
What does he say? Give me the phrase. Tell me how he goes into battle. He has to make his choice. How does he send his ship forward? What are his words? All of these will speak to who that person is and what that captain is. These are all interesting character pieces. They mean something, right? But I think if you were to remake the original Kirk stories and then have Captain Kirk say a new catchphrase that you thought was really cool, I don't think that's just changing it for the sake of you, not for the sake of the character or the fans.
PJ, are
Okay.
you
Let's
ready
see
to play?
let's see if we can hear.
Okay, technical difficulties. There's no audio coming through, but tell us, Paul, what's going on here?
Yeah, this is This is I don't know. Are we allowed to swear on this show? Tell me
go
yes.
ahead.
Can I swear?
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a guy called Officer Fucknuts. That's his last name. So we got to the end of the day, and I was a bit punchy because I'd been really tired, and so we had Officer Fucknuts show up. I was like, "Give me a shirt, right?" And I showed up with a bottle of blood wine in my hand and like Five-All that one Stephen had, like a Five-All and a cap on half sideways, and then promptly described like what my life was like. Like I had a Klingon girlfriend, she bit me a lot, and all kinds of stuff like that. Right? And just sort of like talking about how it's really crazy how like if you accidentally reverse a ship in War 1, you can create an errant supernova that destroys millions of species. But it's okay, I got out, right? And, so we did it, and we realized, I kid you not, but this would be another one that we put up on Meta. It's sort of like Comedy Genius, because you do it at the last second and you realize that's actually really funny. I actually really like this guy. So we are going to do a little series that's like Meta Studios Star Trek offering. Apologies. But we are going to, because that set over there, the AXANAR set is so amazing. And we were like, why can't we do a comedy over there? So we're going over there and do a comedy about like the ship and world, right? And he's the captain, and you've got like all these really bad crew members, and then one really, really uptight first officer that just wants to get everything done. So that guy is actually going to live. Yes, you're going to see me acting because it turns out it was a bit of Comedy Genius.
This looks freaking
Awesome.
Hysterical, Paul. I'm looking forward to this.
PJ, can you bring the screen up on all of us?
Yeah, you see the volumes turned down there on that screen.
Oh, maybe that was the issue.
There you go. You got no volume. That's probably what did.
Yeah, the
Did
volume
you guys
is-
not hear that?
No, we didn't hear it.
No, we didn't hear any of
You
it.
need to turn it up on that screen.
All right. All right.
Did you have the audio? There's an audio option on the screen share.
Yeah. For some reason, though,
It's not working. Okay,
sometimes it doesn't work.
Gotcha.
we'll continue. Comics Division, what is your question?
Again, you kind of caught me off guard. I don't have
Oh
anything.
my God!
I know I'm a terrible guest.
You've only been in here for an hour, mate.
No, I just got distracted. My wife came in, so I had to mute. I missed part of the conversation, but
I want to point out the Comedy Genius in that. Basically, you're the guy on Major League where they're on the radio, and he would turn to his color commentator and he would say, like, "So what do you think of that?" And the guy would just nod. And he goes, "He's not the best color commentator in the business."
I have to say though, man, I'm really excited for AXANAR. I remember watching the prelude to AXANAR like 6 years ago. I actually just went back and rewatched it before we went live, and I'm very excited to see this. Do we have an idea of when this is going to get released?
Yeah, my understanding, and obviously there's only so much I can do. Right? I'm not the executive producer. Our job at Meta is to come in and produce direct when we can. And so obviously, I also through post and all that kind of stuff. What I am being told is the goal will be to release it for San Diego and then either Dragon Con or there's a Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. So that period of time, those two episodes will come out one, and then the next one, probably the last one, will be at Dragon Con in Atlanta. So that's the goal. I will say that, I spent yesterday working on the trailer and locking it up for the trailer that's coming out to show people the new stuff. We're working on visual effects right now. We have a second shoot. We've got a first shoot in the bank. I can only make the stuff, and hopefully it'll get released then,
Very cool. So what about the lore that you guys are drawing upon for AXANAR, right? It's like, I know that it seems like there's like a little known like canon wise. So are you basically just kind of going and expanding on top of that? What kind of sources did you use?
Are you talking about the 4 Years' War?
Yes.
Yeah, so the 4 Years' War, I mean, again, you're talking to a guy who like this was obviously something that was alluded to. I really like it when they take a piece, of a thing, here's, Captain April, the original captain of the Enterprise, or here's a thing that happened, the 4 Years' War, and this guy Garth was mentioned at a little point in one of the early episodes, and it was mentioned that he had lost his mind a little bit, or he had an issue, and so going in and showing that it comes from a war that was created between the Klingons and the Federation. The Klingons were worried about Federation expansion. The Federation were worried about Klingon aggression. You know, it very much speaks to the original types of things that were in Star Trek, which is the questions of the war and racial harmony and all these other kind of things were in there. The mistrust. There's this really cool kind of backdrop, and so we used that. And, you know, some of it is made up. Obviously, it never existed. No one actually wrote it up. So hopefully we get a chance to write it up. A big thing for myself and Alec is that I really wanted to name a ship a certain thing. And Alec's kind of like the keeper of the flame with you can or you can't do this in terms of Star Trek. So I wanted to name one of the ships the USS Mitchell, because I am British and the Spitfire is one of the most important machines of the 20th century, and if you're British and someone says Spitfire, you start crying, right? That's our plane. It won us the Second World War. You know, you guys were 3 years late. You guys are 3 years late. You're making up for it by trying to start the next one. And so I really wanted to call it the USS Mitchell, and Alex like, no, it has to be a such and such class with this kind of thing. So, you know, it's named after a famous inventor. You know, so I'm going to find a way in which the USS Mitchell can actually be a ship in Star Trek, and hopefully at some point it will be canon. You know,
no, it sounds like a ship name too. So
it does actually. But I have a question about Captain Fucknuts. Actually,
yeah,
I do. So no, this
promoted him.
As a writer, and don't get me wrong, like I think it looks like it's going to be really funny. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with Captain Fucknuts. However, there's a difference between doing a Star Trek parody, which clearly is what you're looking at, is with Captain Fucknuts and I'm sure his inept crew, and if this was actual Trek canon, like if you were actually making something for CBS. Now, the reason I ask you about this is because there's something very much like Captain Fucknuts that CBS produced, a short Trek called The Trouble with Edward. And so I'm curious what you think of if CBS approached you and said, we want Captain Fucknuts for actual Trek, what would you think?
Well, they wouldn't let me do it because there's swearing and all kinds of. I mean, the premises are all really funny. Like we got a scene. There's this first officer. He's like the science officer. He's called Groknar, and he's got no sense of humor. He has absolutely no imagination whatsoever. And he's yelling at the crew because the crew don't give a shit, right? The captain don't care. They're all tossing a tribble around like a football and like hanging out and stuff like that, right? So they don't care, and they're all watching like English Premier League. That's, you know, big thing for me. So they're all sitting there like watching the English Premier League on the screen. He calls it the television, right? The captain always says like, "Hey, put that thing up on the television." Like none of them know how to work any of their stuff. Right. So in that particular scene, Groknar's yelling at all the crew, and he's like, "Give me a tactical display, damn it! I want a course plot like this." And he just yells at everybody, and they send it over to him, and they've drawn the plot, and they've drawn it in the shape of a penis, right? And everyone's laughing. It's fun, right?
CBS would not object to the cussing or anything. I mean, they've dropped the F-bomb several times now on Trek.
Yeah, they have.
Good, right? So they let us do that, and the general premise of it is it's the USS Wanker so far, and it's flying out through space, and it's literally like it comes by and they've crossed out the old name because I'm an old requisition ship, and they've just written Wanker underneath it because I don't know. It's you remember in Star Trek he would always go, you know, our 5-year mission to boldly go. His thing is sort of like, yeah, we got a series of like 3-minute missions, procreate wherever we can, right? Because Kirk would always wherever he could go, and it's basically a bunch of stupid like little vignette jokes, because you know what, guys, like smile, right? Like why not? Like why not have fun? Why not enjoy yourself? I think the fans will love it. I think they'll appreciate the fact that we care. If it was canon, if they said yes, you can do this, it would be pretty rad. I would say to CBS, like, you gotta be kidding me, man. Like, can I? Absolutely. Be in, and we'd be making it all the time.
You know, the funny thing is, I think they'll actually let you do that.
Yeah,
they will.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's why I'm asking, because a lot of people were absolutely shocked when they saw Trouble with Edward, where they actually cast H. John Benjamin. I don't know if you know who he is, but you know, hilarious comic actor. And they did this whole thing with the tribble. You mentioned the tribbles. That tribbles are basically, hey, you shave them and they're mostly just meat, and so they're great to eat. And the reason Tribbles reproduce quickly is he put his own genetics into Tribbles, and he's really horny. So the Tribbles are constantly popping out baby Tribbles. This was an actual canon Star Trek story.
Damn, that's good.
And so, yeah, and so a lot of fans were really pissed off about that.
I don't think
And
that
so
like that. Ours is more. I mean, I don't know, but remember, right?
no, but you see, what you're talking about is funny because it's parody. I mean, we know you're not.
Yeah.
We know you're not seriously trying to tell us that's what Star Trek is, but that is what they're doing over at CBS, and that's why a lot of people are angry.
Well, I think well, the way that we would approach it is, wouldn't it be funny if, right?
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be funny if there was a fuck up ship floating around the universe where the guy was like, we actually have a character called Lieutenant Sweet, and she doesn't know how to operate the controls. So someone will go like, all right, open the hailing frequency, and she'll go, and they go, no, the red button over there, and then they point her to it, and then they press it for her. She's like, go ahead. Hello. She's like, hello, anyone there? Like, she don't know how to do it, you know? And I always think the idea of like, wouldn't it be funny if they had one ship that was on the uncharted end of the galaxy, and that was first point of contact with a bunch of aliens? They wouldn't know what they're thinking of, you know? But it's just as likely anyway, isn't it? You know? So I think it's more like that, like parody and fun. Like, don't take yourself too seriously, guys, because you got one go around this planet, right? Like, smile a little bit. You know?
On that note, Paul, what do you think about the formula that Seth has found with comedy and drama in the Orville?
Yeah, see, so that like, I'm a big fan of that. Like, it's don't take yourself too seriously, right? Realize that from comedy comes from tragedy. Tragedy comes. You got to juxtapose the two of them, right? So you take any Shakespearean play, there will be a comedy, and in it there will be difficult moments. You take a tragedy, and there will still be funny moments in it, because you need to juxtapose the two of them against each other to understand the human condition, right? Don't take yourself so seriously. I mean, Joker, great film and everything, but man, you're wearing me out, you know? Like, you're wearing me out. It's an ordeal to watch it. It's not a piece of entertainment. I need to understand something. By the same token, I think, there was a moment in Christopher Nolan's Batman with Heath Ledger when he was the Joker, where he walks out and he tries to blow up the hospital, and it doesn't work, and he taps it a few times and he blows up, and he's satisfied and he walks off. And that was actually genuinely funny. And I was like, way to go. That was like really well done.
So I think that moment, Paul, that you just described was actually ad lib.
Yeah, I was going to point that out too.
There's a problem with the explosives.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, right?
And he pulled it off so well.
Just like one of the most brilliant, vulnerable characters in our society is Indiana Jones, right? He's so vulnerable. And I've often said this, I think he's so great, because that whole thing where, the guy's doing the sword play and in front of him, and then he just pulls up, was ad-libbed because Harrison Ford was really sick that day and he just couldn't do the fight. But seeing that's what I said about audacity earlier on in storytelling, right? The audacity of saying, there's a moment in Indiana Jones where he and Karen Allen in the first movie, he's hurt himself and he's got cuts all over him, and he's a big bad guy, but he's got some cuts, and she's trying to clean him, and he's not sure. And then she kind of kisses his hand, and she says, where else does it hurt? And he points to his, and then he points to his neck, and then he points to his lips, and you're like, oh, you guys, you kids, get a room, like, it's really, really nice, right? It's a really beautifully put together love scene in the middle of an action adventure story. You can do great stuff wherever you want to, only if you pay attention to your craft and have the audacity of storytelling. But if you're timid and you start rehashing the same story all the time, you're never going to win. I want to make one more point. When I did one of the things that I did the Inhumans, where we did win an Eisner for it, and no one else has ever done, and I always point to it and say, this is why we succeeded and other people were struggling with those characters. Want to know what it is? It's Black Bolt is not supposed to speak. That character is too powerful, and if he speaks, his voice is so resonant that he blows stuff up. We're the only book where he never speaks inside the entire 12-issue maxi series. Every other writer and creator that did it had him speak so they could have the stuff blow up, and at that point, you've undermined the point of the character. He can't speak, not supposed to.
Nice. JT, what's your question?
Another writer's question. Paul, what's your take on writer's block? Is there such a thing? Does it exist? So
I can't afford to have it. I haven't really dealt with it that badly, but there are times when you feel this like worry about it. And I think that what I tend to do when I do think that people have it to some extent. And then what I do when I feel like I'm struggling with something is I just find myself a difficult chore and I complete that instead. So let's say, for example, I'm working on a novel right now. I'm working on 2 of them, actually. And I have been struggling with a chapter. Well, I write it anyway. I get it done. We call it the vomit draft, right? We puked it up, and now I can fix it. So I muscle through anyway. I write something, I get it written, because at that point you're going to find out what was, what it was, where it was that you went wrong, right? You can edit. Your work begins the moment you've done your first draft. So I find my way through writer's block by actually getting it done, and then I go back and fix it.
Awesome. That's helpful. Thanks.
Paul, I have a question. Where do you call home? It sounds like you're traveling and experiencing so many things right now, and where do you actually call home? I mean, other than home is where the heart is.
Well, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I've been here for a number of years. I'm the most revoltingly happily married man, got 2 little kids, and we live here. I love it here. I think that, we are the 3rd leg of the creative stool. So we have a 30% tax credit. We do film and animation here. We incentivize video game development. So it's a great place. I actually chaired an advisory committee a few years ago for the governor. So, and when I first met him, there was a $10 bet. Will I go in and say, all right, governor? And I did.
Nice. Comics division. I'm putting you on the spot again. Go ahead.
No, I actually have a question prepared. So, you've written a lot of comics. What is your favorite comic book story that you've written?
Some people would think that I wouldn't have one. I actually do have one. Probably a couple of them. I really like Fairy Quest that I did. Fairy Quest is a very honest, all ages story, and I knew we were onto something when, no matter which convention I went to, people would buy it. And they would come back inevitably and say, when do I get the next one? I love it so much. And it was so all ages that you could get an 80-year-old man or a 5-year-old little girl, and they would be equally entertained by that book. So I think Fairy Quest, I feel, is quite an accomplishment. My favorite work I ever did in mainstream was actually Captain America. And it actually had one of my favorite comments. So I did Captain America Mythos, which was this Mythos series that was fully painted. And then I did 4 books called Captain America Theater of War. And each one of those was successively more emotional. I knew I was onto something because my editor called me and he said, would you like to write Captain America? Do you want to pitch me on something for this one shot? And I called him up half an hour later. I said, I got 4 ideas for you. And we did all 4. And the funny thing was I pitched him the first idea and he laughed as I gave him the punchline, and I said, I know what you were trying to do there, Tom. You were going to cry, weren't you? Because it was a really emotional story. And he said, you bastard. I've been in this 45 years and you made me cry. You just made me cry with that story. Every single one of those came out. And the last one was about Captain America being the embodiment, the personification of the history of the United States of America. So his ghost is called Ghosts of My Country. And there's a series of people that are writing a poem from John Adams at the original signing of the Declaration of Independence, all the way through Francis Scott Key sitting on a boat. And he's basically having to sit on this English boat as his country is bombarded by the English with these Congreve rockets. And they're sitting in Baltimore Harbor, and the rockets are smashing into Baltimore. And he thinks it's lawless, but he's sitting there. And in the morning, he wakes up and he realizes the flag is still, it's all shattered and tattered. And at that point, Francis Scott Key is writing a poem called Ghosts of My Country. And it's the same poem that people have written across the ages. And then he starts writing the national anthem. So when we finished it, it was this really cool issue. It was like the epitome of what I wanted to do. And I'll never forget that one of my favorite reviews of any book I've ever written was someone from the United States military who said it took a British guy and an Italian artist to teach me the true meaning of American patriotism.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
I really like that review,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so if you ever see it, Captain America Theater of War, the very first story in that is also special. And then Mythos, which was literally the origin of Captain America, and we put something in there, and it'll make you cry. It'll make you cry when you read it. The best part is the very last page has a picture of a young man called Doug Huggins, who is one of the other characters in the story. And Doug was my neighbor, and he was on the USS St. Louis when Pearl Harbor was bombed. So we made him a main character in Captain America.
Oh, wow. My grandfather was actually at Pearl Harbor.
Cool.
Anti-Trekker.
Yes, sir.
Your next question, sir.
Actually, yeah, that's as far as your tenure at Marvel. Is there anything that while you were there that after the fact you said, "Oh, why did I do that"?
Couple. I think that Mark Buckingham and I on Spider-Man wanted to like crack some eggs, see if we can make an omelet. And every so often we would do something and say, there's some brilliance in there. Like one of my favorites is that we did him versus a gang of mimes because we wanted the sense of humor to come back. So he fights this gang of mimes, and they would like point guns to try, and they would just beat the shit out of him, and they would like put their hands up and like and he traps them, I kid you not, in a plexiglass factory. So they're all trapped behind glass. It was totally stupid, but why not, right? Like, why can't we laugh?
Trapping the mind behind plexiglass. I got to give that to you. It
was great. It was genius, right? And then he actually even shows them his bare ass to get them to run after him, which they would never let me do at this point, right? But we also created a character called Typeface, and he had like letters, and he would throw them.
That's almost as bad as Condiment King.
It was the worst character ever, but we did it for that reason. And people would moan, and they would say, "Oh my God, why did you do that?" And we kind of did it for that reason. We thought it would be atrocious. I will say, as much as you can miss. I mean, there are a few things I think I look at that I usually, when I missed, and I don't mean to put this on someone else, but I would almost always say that when we missed, it was because some editor wanted something, editorial. And when they left us alone, we were just fine. Thanks very much. The one that I regret not doing, I'm going to add on to your question.
Sure.
There's actually one that I wrote that we did not end up doing, which I was really disappointed. I wanted to use the big wheel because he's a Spider-Man character, and he's a guy in the middle of a wheel, and we wanted to call him Axel, so he could be the guy in the middle of the wheel. It was a great joke. But we found out that there was a Spider-Man guy called the Hypno Hustler. Now, do any of you guys know who the Hypno Hustler is?
Yes.
You do. Hypno Hustler was from the 70s, and he was this dude who would sing disco music, and he would have these 3 backup singers, and they were called the Harpies, I believe, and they would perform on stage, and they would trance, and then he would jump off stage, steal their wallets, get back on stage, and no one would ever know what had happened, right? Brilliant. Right? Absolutely atrocious hero. So
as far as I recall, that was Spidey Super Stories.
Oh my God. Okay. Right.
Go ahead.
Maybe, and I found out about this character. I'm like, the best story would be if he's been in jail and he gets out and he finds out that people have got secret recordings of his music, and they've been playing it at raves so that everybody can get all wrecked at those raves. There's like everyone's getting hypnotized and everything, and he comes back in search of his royalties. Like, good story. And Marvel never ended up publishing it, which I was really upset about.
Paul, can I ask you a follow-up question from the audience? A lot of people are wondering if you had any kind of relationship with Stan Lee.
Yeah, I did to some extent. I have a personal relationship that spans a number of years. I would point everybody again to our Meta Studios YouTube channel. So I hate to sort of shield myself.
I've been sharing it in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the things in it is I wanted to tell like loads and loads of personal stories about what happened to me. And so there was an issue of a book that I wrote. It was called Stan Lee Meets, and Stan Lee meets the Silver Surfer. So he meets his own creation, right? Which is funny because at one point I was written into the Avengers meeting my own creation, the Sentry, right? So I've actually done it. But in that book, myself and Mark Buckingham, who I did Spider-Man with, wrote a story about Stan Lee and what he meant to me. When I was a little boy living on that farm, it was difficult. But my grandmother would send me this tube of comics from London, and it would have one copy of Daredevil, one copy of Spider-Man. These were reprints from America and British comics in it. And we would get it every 2 weeks. We'd open it. We'd read them 1,000 times over because that was about what we got. And I remember that I would read these long words, and I'd think in the letters page mostly, and Stan Lee would say a thing in the letters page, and I'd be like, cool, right? I don't know what that means, but that sounds great. And I assumed that Spider-Man was in London because I figured he was in a city. That's where he must be, because I think that people see Spider-Man as themselves, right? And by the way, if any of you ever pick up issue 35 of Peter Parker Spider-Man, that's one that people come to me crying their eyes out about, and they hold it with two hands and bawl their eyes out, because it's about a little African-American kid, and he has a secret friend called Spider-Man, and you find out that his version of Spider-Man looks just like him, which is really cool, right? So what I wrote in the Stan Lee Meets is that I am a little boy sitting on that farm back in time, and I'm trying to write a story, and here comes Stan, and he lands on the Fantastic Car, and he gets out of it, and he's like, what's up, true believer? Why so glum? And I'm like, I just wrote a story, and it's all pooey. I hate it. And he's like, well, it can't be that pooey. And he looks at it, and he's like, well, it needs a bit of work. And he teaches me in that conversation how to tap into an idea. And at that point, I'm concentrating, and my ideas start coming to life and like running around, but they're all terrible. And then we look up, and the Sentry is up on a rooftop. And I say, as a little kid, I'm like, who's that up there? And he's like, that's just an idea you haven't had yet, true believer. So I did have this relationship with him because I wanted to know him. So I then come to America. When I started working with Marvel, there were two things that were really cool. One is that when I got married, Stan said he casually made fun of me. He kept saying that my wife was too good for me, which he's right, she is. And then the other thing was that one day he called my editor-in-chief, my editor, Joe Quesada, called me, said, well, I'm going to make your day. I just spoke to Stan. This is when we were doing the Sentry. And the shtick was that the Sentry was created by Stan, and that he'd been lost and we found him, because that was what the story was about. No, I created the Sentry. But anyway, so Stan really bought into it, and he liked the idea, and he gave a message to me through Joe Quesada, and he said, and I quote, "You tell that boy he's a genius." And I'm like, oh,
wow.
Thanks, man.
That's quite a compliment.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's awesome.
I like that compliment.
That's
Wow.
fantastic. I have a question for you.
One second. I got to go, guys. I just want to say thank you very much, Paul. It was very enjoyable talking to you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to backing your future works.
Brilliant. Come see our YouTube channel, man.
I already subscribed. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thanks, comics.
Take care, guys.
See you, comics.
Before you go, well, he's gone. I was going to ask him to pitch his website, but we'll do that later.
I got it, George.
Okay, great. Paul, I got a question for you. To everyone who's going to be replaying this video later, what kind of advice would you have for an aspiring storyteller? Not a writer, a storyteller. I mean, we hear how you have grown up, in your experience, and you became a storyteller. What would you tell someone that didn't experience the same things that you have?
Right. So you got a few things in there, right? It's a big question. Yeah. First of all, who are you writing for? Because I submit that you're writing about yourself for your audience. You're not writing for yourself, right? So be honest about yourself. And if I'm going to write about a scene in which, someone's sad because someone broke up with them, you're really just admitting that feeling. Right? So be honest about it. Like, be really honest as a writer. Study, use reference, learn things, right? Like, if you're a teacher, you're supposed to learn as you teach. And I love learning. I love to learn things that I don't know. So I quite like teaching. But what I would say, the number one thing, I'm sure that anyone that knows me knows this is coming. I have a thing that I've learned how to say over the years, and it's this. There is a maxim that says that writers write, and I don't agree with that. Writers finish. So don't be in the process of writing because it doesn't mean anything. Writers finish. Finish your work. And then when you finished it and it's terrible and it's horrible, right? At that point, at that point, then you've got something. Okay? It's my number one piece of advice. Because everything else, you can fail forward, right? As a writer, you can do it with confidence. You can break stuff. You can get everything wrong. You can hate everything that you are doing. But if you finish stuff, then that's when things will go well, right? So finish it and then learn from it.
Nice. Fantastic. JT, what's your next question?
Well, Paul, you've definitely worked with a lot of, I mean, you worked with Eastman and Laird. You worked with Alan Moore. I know you probably can't divulge too much, maybe not, or maybe you don't want to divulge too much personal information on anybody, but is there anybody that really stands out to you that you enjoyed working with, or just was maybe perhaps not even what you thought they would be?
Well, I've got listen, man, I've got a million stories. Like what you want to know is like the crazy stories from my life, right? Because I have like millions of them, right? So working, like my brother. So anyone that ever read my Hellblazer run, I wrote Hellblazer for 5, almost 6 years, and there was a character in it called Rich the Punk, and it's literally my brother. All right, so all I'd ever do is just call up my brother and say, "What are you doing today?" And then he'd tell me some crazy stuff he was doing. Remember, we're from a bunch of like travelers, right? We're like, my brother's living in a caravan. And I'm like, "What are you doing, mate?" And he'd tell me like this is a true story, right? At one point, my brother called me up and he said, "I can hear noise in the background." This is when I was writing Hellblazer. And he said, "You never guess what I'm doing." And I said, "I bet you're standing on top of Stonehenge." And he's like, "You bastard." He was on top of Stonehenge because it was the solstice and he was kicking a copper in the head. He was literally kicking at a policeman. And he ended up on the front of the daily tabloids. That's his silhouette on the front of that day when they overtook Stonehenge and stood on top of it, right? I knew he was doing something like that. So I took my brother to meet Alan Moore one time, and they hit it off just like that. They didn't care. Like I've never seen two people so stoned in my entire life. So I think Richard, my brother, bought Alan a bunch of hash down to the Browns Hotel in London, which is literally like the swankiest hotel right next to Hyde Park. And Alan wanted some hash, so my brother bought it for him. So I'm like, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. Like,
that's awesome.
millions of those stories,
That's great.
Andy Trekker.
Go ahead. Hold on 1 second. You guys go without me for 1 second, okay? I will be back in 1 second.
All right, gentlemen, what is your experience so far?
This is cool. It's a lot of fun. It's not every day you get to talk with somebody that's as accomplished as Paul. So it's just kind of cool to hear his stories, hear his kind of get to pick his brain a little bit while we have this opportunity.
What has thrown you for a surprise? For me, the surprise was a lot of his writing is actually in his life. It just retranslated into fiction. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I would say probably the same. Yeah.
Momentary crisis. Here we go. Crisis averted.
Nice.
Wonderful. Andy Trekker is up next on the list of questions. I just made a comment to everybody, Paul, that it's absolutely fascinating that a lot of your life is translated into the fiction that you're presenting to the audience, and it's just it is really fascinating because if someone's clever enough, they could possibly puzzle together your entire autobiography.
Yeah. I will say that two things. One, my autobiographical sort of work is going to be insane. I think my autobiography would probably be the most interesting thing. Second thing I would say is, yes, my life makes its way into my work. But I want to go back to that thing you said. Let's say I was working with CBS, right? It always would, no matter what you make. It made its way into Marvel. It makes its way into Star Trek. It makes it, the stuff we're doing with Star Trek AXANAR is very much about PTSD and the consequences of death in war. Right now, my family went through, my great grandfathers losing their lives. I mean, one of them lost his life on a Somme, Charlie Hazelgrove. One of them got shot in Arras and just bled out. Another one died in Palestine 2 days after the end of the First War. And the trickle-down effect of their death remains with my family even to this day. So I put that in AXANAR. And when people see it and they look at whether or not there's anything in it, and it's great, there's ships flying around, and this is the war between the Federation and the Klingons and that. And it's great and all, but really there's personal stuff in all of this material. How else could you do it? I don't think you could do it unless you put a piece of yourself into your work.
Is there anything you ever write, Paul, that you feel like is very detached from yourself, or do you feel like everything that comes out of your creative process can be linked back to your personal experience?
Well, I try to put it in my personal experience. Remember, we're talking about things like I think there's some things that that obviously don't come from a personal experience. I think that when you write about, say, like murder, for example, you're doing like murder mysteries. I'm not a serial killer. Well, they
haven't caught you.
Yeah, but I can look at, say, the effect of look what happened with when O.J. Simpson trial happened. You could see the sadness of the families of the victims. So the meaning of death and murder was still there for us to look at. So whether or not I've had a family member murdered, I haven't. Have I murdered anybody? No. But can I write about murder? Yeah, because I can kind of see things, and so I suppose that sometimes it's not the specific thing that it affects us, but we still have to kind of learn and understand it.
Gotcha.
Paul, I put up the Sidekick cover. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this? Looks really interesting. You want to tell us a little bit about this? And I have some more images that you sent to us.
Yeah, if you put them up, I'll explain to people who these are. So Sidekick is a project that we're going to do for Meta. We're actually going to get a TikTok channel going that will basically put these characters. So the premise is the guy.
That's great. You're going to do it on TikTok?
Yeah, we're going to do a TikTok, right? The guy is Eddie Edison. He is the illiterate superhero name, and he works for the guy right behind him called Mr. Excellent. And if you can see, Mr. Excellent is wearing a shirt that says XL on it, which he thinks stands for excellence, but of course it's just an extra large shirt. And he's under attack because he's basically put upon. So the original premise of Sidekick was he decided he wasn't making any money as a trusty sidekick to the world's most moronic superhero. So he jobs himself out to 4 heroes at the same time, and they all call his marker in on the same day. So it's literally Benny Hill with superheroes. He's in the middle of a costume change every other 5 minutes, And so we moved that forward because Chris Moreno, who's the artist, and I decided this was the funniest thing ever. So we created 120 characters, and you can see a few of them. On the left there, the guy in the green is a guy called Speed Reader, and he can read almost twice as fast as you can. That's it. That's
great.
Right? Mantelope. The guy right behind there's Backyard Betty in the foreground. She's like, trailer park, power of a trailer park tornado. Mr. Fister is the guy behind. He has a one really big fist. Static Man is there. He harnesses the power of almost 7 balloons. So we got all the Dirt Boy and the Hobo and all these there's in the background behind Static Man, you can see one guy. I love this guy. He's called Eterbium Man because frankly all the other elements were taken. So he got the last element. And his catchphrase, it's time to get kind of rusty. PJ, if you can put these up, I'll tell you some of these.
I'm going to start putting them up.
Let me ask you, have you, because this is really reminding me of something, an old Saturday Night Live sketch from the 80s called the Interesting Four.
I love it.
The Interesting Four. They were a parody of the Fantastic Four. And so, like, they had Weather Woman, and she had the ability to change the ambient temperature by a full 3 degrees.
Yeah.
you know, and stuff. And so basically completely useless powers. You know?
Yeah. No, we have all of ours have completely useless power. We actually did one called the Thrilling Three, and there used to be 4 of them. But when the guy who was the Human Torch turned himself on, he just burned to death. This is Backyard Betty. She's the temptress of the trailer park. She has the power of an errant tornado. Let's see, who else have we got? Everyone has their favorites, you know. So what we'll do is we'll release all of these on TikTok sort of on a daily basis, or every other day. So you just do the thing, and up comes Sidekick, and then you'll see all these characters. You know. Let's see, who else have we got? This is Living Sherbet. So the idea behind the Living Sherbet is that, you know, Swamp Thing, it's like radioactive swamp water or something. So basically, this is like a discarded ice cream cone by a radioactive sea, and then water washes up, and the Living Sherbet is born. This, by the way, is my wife's favorite one. She thinks he's really cute.
Yeah, there might be. I think that I could definitely see this wind up being translating into some other things for sure.
Yeah,
beyond.
Yeah, everyone loves Sidekick, so we figured instead of sitting on it now, we want to do it. We're actually, Chris and I created 120 of these characters literally in an email chain. This guy, he's one of my favorites. This is Confuso, the world's dumbest robot. So basically, if you want to calculate your attack vector to the nearest decimal point, you need to look elsewhere, because this guy can't calculate shit. He's just terrible, right? So Confuso, the world's dumbest robot. I love the design, by the way, because Chris Moreno is an absolute genius. He is the art director for Muppet Babies right now.
Wow, it's pretty cool. Very
like
good stuff.
Yeah.
So that's going to be on TikTok, you said?
Yeah, we're going to do a TikTok channel, but we'll also put it out once we've done it on TikTok. We will put the characters up on YouTube. This is Dagmar the Swede, the Norse god of drizzle, because I just thought it was really funny that Thor has this giant hammer, Mjolnir, that he kind of holds. So the idea is that Dagmar the Swede, the Norse god of drizzle, is like the god of something other than a storm. He's just the god of like a little bit of drizzle, and he's the son of Snegar, the Leviathan of the puddle. And when it rains, he holds his mighty umbrella aloft, and it rains a lot. That's all he does. He makes it rain. Like, none of them have actually really good things. They just, you know, their powers are really crap. Like Perspiration Lad, you know.
Nice. Well, looking forward to that. That's
this guy here. This guy here is called Liquid Courage. So the shtick behind him, and I always thought this was really good, is, you know, like some of these superheroes would have like a serum that they would take. You know, they drink a serum and then they would be superpowered. And so this guy, when he drinks a mystical clear liquid known as vodka, he thinks he's invincible. You're like, I'll take on everybody because he's just drunk, right?
There's 120 of these characters. Is there a particular reason why the number 120?
Because Chris and I went, we need to stop doing this, and then he just drew all of them. And so we're going to do another 120 on an email chain. We literally came up with the names, just the names, and Chris drew them all because he's a genius. He's an absolute genius. So I drew all of these things, and I wrote up all the descriptions for each of them. And the thing is, everybody finds their favorite. There's a couple in here that you guys won't see because I didn't find the artwork for it. But we would have like a guy. My favorite is a guy called Undercover Quarterback, and he's a quarterback by day. And he has his helmet and his eye black and everything, and then he puts on a trench coat, and you don't know who he is. Like Clark Kent, where he put his glasses on, you wouldn't know who he was. And basically, he's a quarterback by day and not fooling anybody by night. That was his. Yeah. So there you go. There's our. Are we done? Are we finished, Peter? Or?
I'm just having trouble with some more images, but I'm gonna bring some new stuff up that you sent me. But I just want to take an opportunity to ask. You said something really interesting in a presentation that you did, where you said a lot of people, you know, kind of look down on comics in society, and you said that comics are really ingrained in humanity, and you brought up a picture of cave paintings.
Yeah.
I thought that was brilliant.
Well, think of so comic books, as much as we may want to look down on them, this is probably because of the way that the American market has gone. You know, just superheroes or nothing, right? But that's not the way the world looks at comic books. So there's a way that you can sort of imagine it. You know, imagine that you are in Lascaux or the caves of Altamira in Spain, and it is 12,500 years ago, and you walk in, and at the beginning of the cave, there's a picture of a bison, buffalo. And then there's a picture of a little man with a spear. And then further inside the cave as you go in, there's a picture of the bison with a spear in it and the men running around it. That is a sequential narrative. Here's a buffalo, here's a guy with a spear. They threw the spear at the buck. You know, comic books are hardwired into our psyche. They are the oldest form of human artistic expression except for music. And so there's a way to look at comics as an art form and really understand that they are an incredible way to convey an idea. And that's why it's such a shame that the industries themselves break it. You know, we look at all of these things, right? We look at the fundamental adherence to storytelling ought to be the number one thing, and it is almost always a secondary consideration in the entertainment industry. And I think that's why you guys really like the Orville, because frankly, it adheres to storytelling first, and it happens to have other stuff in it. By the way, this is so her power is the power of double entendre. So everything she says has double meaning, and you can imagine, as you can see, her outfit is pretty suggestive. Yeah. It gets worse, folks. And the pink tackle, she's great. I love the arrow on her short.
This actually brings up a technical question. With all these products that you're creating, these individual IPs, are you creating a style guide for this to license out this work?
Yeah, so there's a style guide and all the pitch. This is by the way, this is Miles Flatt, the vocal assassin. He can kill people with his voice, which is just like, that picture is one of my favorites. I mean, ultimately, you know, there is a style guide. What we'll do with this is we'll put it up, and then people will really like the characters, I think. And to some extent, we'll parlay that into merchandising, and we'll put it up on our YouTube channel. And I think then, you know, with today's, you know, there's a democratization of merchandising, of filmmaking, music. Everything's been democratized. So a great way of showing people that they can have as much of this as they want or as little as they want, and ultimately all we have to do is to take their order for you like Miles Flatt, the vocal assassin, great, order that one and we'll make you a t-shirt, kind of thing. You know, if we get to the merchandising side of it, the idea would be that we want to build it out as a game. It's actually an online playable kind of card game with these characters because they all have really crappy powers. And so we'll play it that way. We'll do some merchandising. We'll try to create some 3D versions of these characters and people can order them. So we got plenty of things that we can do with them. But the fact is, if you just look at the merchandising capability, then you've lost it. What you want to do is to make people love it in today's environment. That's why free-to-play mobile games, when they're really good, work. And that's why giant corporations can't take the model of a free-to-play mobile game. Because a free-to-play mobile game is literally a community that the fans love, and then they're willing to give you money because they like you so much and because you've given them something of value. You have to give them the thing of value first and then say, hey, man, if you want more, just give me a bit of money if you can, right? Corporations hate that model. But guess what? Epic don't mind that model for Fortnite, do they? So no. we want to live in that space a little bit.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. Just a quick thought. I contacted the licensor or the people who hold the rights to Star Trek in Canada, and I said, "Look, I can do custom 3D printed Star Trek ships with people's names on them." They said, "Okay, great. How much how much you're going to give us up front for licensing fee?" I said, "Nothing. One sale equals one profit. There's no inventory to carry, so there's no jeopardy." For anybody. They said, well, no, we're not going to deal with small individuals like you. I said, wait a minute. I've been in licensing for like 15, 20 years. You know, it's the small guys that actually are making your paycheck.
Right.
And they just didn't want to deal with that.
People forget where their paychecks come from. So, like, I have made, I hope, a career of not doing that. So, for example, I've never charged for a signature at a convention because you've already paid my wages, man. You bought my stuff. Like, I don't need you to pay me another $5 to sign my own comic.
Exactly.
I think that's awesome, by the way.
That's really cool.
Well, why would it be? By the way, I want to be clear. Like, I don't really have a complaint to make about my friends and colleagues in the comic industry or wherever that actually do charge for signatures. I want to be clear about that. I have no disagreement with them. If I think it helps pay the way, pay the way in, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully,
it's just your philosophy.
But it's not mine, right? I don't do it. Yeah.
Got it. It's legit. What are we looking at here, Paul?
Yeah, that's the first book I ever wrote for Marvel. It was actually a Star Trek book. So thanks for that. Here it is. So the idea was it was a Romulan
Looks
captain, and she and her ship encounter the Borg, and it was just an interesting thing about nationalism and brainwashing and so on. Actually, just something worth writing. The idea was basically that they capture her, and she's like, Romulus will never be defeated. Romulus forever. She can't be. But then when they capture her, they kind of basically cut her to pieces and start making her into a cyborg. And as they do so, she's like, you'll pay for this, and Romulus will prevail forever. But she begins to go through her memories, and as she's beginning to remember, and they're sucking kind of the personality out of her, she can't remember to say Romulus will prevail. She begins to accidentally lose it until she just is one of the Borg. She's assimilated.
Wow.
Very nice.
Interesting enough that the now Star Trek Picard involves the Romulans and the Borg.
Huh. Was it?
Yeah, it does.
Maybe they read your comic.
Yeah, good. Well, they're welcome. Everyone else is taking my stuff, so you're welcome, guys. I do that all the time. Yeah.
Hey, here's a question. Have you ever been surprised to see any of your work just by happenstance wherever you are? Yes, you're doing books and stuff like that, but sometimes when you're just walking by a store or whatever establishment, and all of a sudden you look around and say, whoops, hey, I did that over there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by it. I mean, I suppose that works everywhere, and once you've done something like the Origin of Wolverine, it's going to be it, right? I mean, you're going to, you'll see that everywhere, right?
Right.
Not surprised. I do think it's funny. Like, I just so diminish it. I probably get in trouble with my partners at Meta because I just don't care. I need to go to awards ceremonies, but I just don't. I've never been to one. I have actually been to one now because someone asked me to recently to host it to get me there.
Oh my God, you sound like Ricky Gervais.
Yeah. So I've been nominated for a couple of BAFTA awards. I didn't go. Can't be bothered. Doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe that's over the top. I think it probably is a little bit. But I mean, one thing that's funny is that my wife, who's a very funny person, she can't walk into a comics. She wants to come in a comic store with me and go, say, tell them who you are, which I won't. But I do remember that she came up to me in a Barnes and Noble at one point. She's like, I just heard people talking about the Origin of Wolverine, and they're like, Jenkins is a genius. Oh my God, we love him. He's the greatest writer ever. And they don't know that you're standing in the next aisle. And I'm like, babe, don't do this. And she's like, so I told him, would you like to meet him?
That's awesome.
I go, yeah, okay. And I walk over, and and you know, the last thing they wanted in their world was for me to come over there. They wanted to talk about me. They didn't want me to be a real person. They were really awkward. They didn't want me to be there. I knew that would happen. Yeah. So,
it must have been quite a surreal experience for them.
Yeah,
one hand they're talking.
Yeah, I think it was pretty surreal. Yeah, absolutely. I like the fact that my Romulan lady has quite a large chest. Apparently, I didn't remember that part of it, but once she's a Borg, she's definitely.
What's those Borg implants?
Yeah, there's some implants.
Yeah.
There's cybernetic implants. Yep, absolutely.
PJ.
And Paul, I'm gonna bring up the sci-fi thing you're working on now. If you want to give us a little heads up before I bring up the image.
Yep. So one of the things that I really care about, I think that maybe you've seen this in our conversation. I think that when we make content in whichever genre, whether it's sci-fi, ghost stories, pick one, it had better be about people. It needs to be about people and how they live and how they feel. And so I was asked a few years ago by my agent actually in LA, and he said, why don't you write a contained science fiction story? And that to me is antithetical to creating something. What, you want me to write a story set inside a spaceship like Alien? And actually I thought that's a great challenge. So I went about the idea of writing a story that right now has quite a lot of traction as a script. We'll see what happens with it. Maybe we get to make it ourselves. But it's called Reset. And the idea is it's a guy, I won't give away too much of the story, but I would tell you it's basically about maybe 80 years from now, something like that. And they are mining asteroids. And the future tells us that if we spend $1 trillion to go get an asteroid, we'll probably come back with $100 trillion worth of platinum. We will devalue precious metals if we bring back an asteroid because there's so much gold and platinum inside asteroids. And the idea, the basic premise is if you were on a ship that far from the world, I mean, if you were on a submarine under the polar ice cap, answer me this question, what would you be thinking about? And to me, it would be, you'd be thinking about your family and connecting to human beings and people. So if you're out in space, what would you be thinking about? And the premise is they towing this asteroid, and as they come through space, they get hit by micrometeoroids. They manage to protect the ship, but the main character in the story is hit by a blast of psychic energy, and he forgets the last 3 months of his life, and then it starts getting worse. He starts to forget a lot of his life. So now this connection he has to people in his life is starting to go away as he saves the ship. So it's this really big contradiction of like what happens to us with how do we connect people. So the stuff that you're seeing here is actually the ship. They're not very high-res pictures, but you can see this is the design of the ship by Albert Martinez. He's doing an amazing, amazing job. It comes from an original pencil drawing that I did for Albert and said, can you do anything with this? And this is the ship. It's called the Capital Sky. It's the one that's towing the asteroid. And the thing about it that I felt was that, when you look at 2001 Space Odyssey, when you look at the revolving thing, obviously they create artificial gravities. And so I thought it'd be really great to have a ship where the central chamber of it, or the two central chambers, on the back of it, they mine the asteroid. So if you keep it revolving at just a light gravity, then in fact, you probably will be able to move things around a lot quicker. So the three chambers kind of revolve relatively slowly against each other, but the central chamber goes a little bit faster, and the front of the ship revolves a little faster, and then the outside little front spoke there is what they call the exopod, and it's where they keep the plants, and that's got like 4 or 5 gravities in it. So it's this really cool like revolving ship that just kind of moves around itself. And it gets hit by meteoroids, and then they lose the containment on the asteroid, and now the asteroid is heading towards Earth, and they have to stop it.
Sweet. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great movie. But the ultimate thing in the story is not, what happens there's the ship kind of going past Saturn. So it's a really good looking ship, and Albert did an amazing job. These are just the low res versions of it right now, the roughs, I suppose. We're just fixing it all up. But it's the story itself. It's about connectivity. It's about why do we love people? Is it because we accidentally met them, or because we were destined to? What's the nature of love and connection, and what part in our lives do our memories play? If you lose your memory, what does that mean? What is it about our humanity? And then one of the part, it's not really a spoiler, but we've got a ship's computer, and we look at that as like HAL, it's going to go crazy, but really it's a connection to that computer, because the main character is connected to that computer psychically, and he's beginning to realize this computer is becoming a sentient. And so at what point, he stops updating the computer's operating system, because he wants to preserve his friend. And they start to have conversations about the nature of love and music. And he's beginning to realize I'm making a friend here with something that wasn't intended to be. So it's who we run into. It's how we connect. There's a couple of characters in the film where one guy is in love with the woman in charge of the mining operation, and she hates him, but he can't do anything about it. He loves her. And so it's this interesting thing of like, and she's like, I'm sorry, what do you want me to do? I can't stand you. And he's like, I know, and I get it. And he's not intrusive. He doesn't like, do anything he's not supposed to. He's just like, I think you're my person. I don't know. It was really sad. There's a lot of like elements of it, all in the framework of a spaceship going out of control.
Wow, that's really fascinating. That you're taking a lot of the technical know-how about space and incorporating into your narrative. That's fantastic. And something interesting about that is that if you actually buy a standard computer today and activate all the features, all the bells and whistles on it, and software-wise, you'll have a machine that's as smart as a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And this is with today's technology.
Yeah. And so if you look forward and you extrapolate and you get machines that learn themselves and that they can move forward and they begin to develop a form of sentience, our question at some point is, what is our consciousness? What is our sentience? How does this all work? It's very complicated.
You know what I'm loving? What I'm loving about these visuals is that your light source is affected by the sun, and you don't have these beautiful sweeping Star Wars or Star Trek what called directional light sources and stuff like that. And that really does bring it home back to 2001.
Yeah, so that's
fantastic.
2001 is a big influence to that story, and that's on the fabulous Albert Martinez. Albert did an amazing job on this. I think these are just these are the initial passes on the ship, the Capital Sky. So I mean, I think that going through deep space, passing by Saturn, like you saw with the Discovery in 2001, doesn't move at it doesn't turn angles and whoosh around. It's cool when it does that, right? It looks great. I love it, but the fact is we got to use physics in space, and it's basically going in one straight line, I would imagine, so Albert did an amazing job with the ship's design so far, based on this crazy pencil drawing that I did, with all the sections and the pieces. And so now, we're going to realize that, and then we're going to do like a little trailer of that and show you just a way. There's a speech in it where he's talking to his wife across distance, and he's just saying, we think that we connect, but maybe we're just ships that pass the night. Maybe we're just travelers, and maybe. It's very sad. There's elements of the story that really hit home, while at the same time, of course, you've got they're being attacked by giant robots and crazy stuff, right? It's cool. It's like Die Hard in space. Die Hard, it's basically Memento in space is what it is.
Wow. That's certainly a humdinger of a plot line.
Yeah.
Let me just say, guys, if anybody on the panel needs to step out, I do want to get through a couple of questions that we have for submitted to Paul. If you guys need to step out, please do. If we're going too long, can you answer a couple more questions, Paul?
I can indeed, sure thing.
I am actually going to wrap it up at this point, though, and so I do want to say, Paul, again, it was an honor to get a chance to talk to you. Thank you for your candor with everything, and it's been really interesting.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for helping me show people our YouTube channel. Because for us, we're going to get it off the ground. We're going to start doing all of this crazy stuff, all the background stuff that we've been talking about. We'll get into the individual images, and we'll kind of show people how we come up with this content. But also, we'll show them all the new content, and hopefully, generally be quite entertaining. And remember, you got Officer Fucknuts coming at some point.
I'm very much looking forward to some Officer Fucknuts. All right, you guys take care.
See you, Anti-Trekker. Everybody subscribe to Anti-Trekker if you have not subscribed to Anti-Trekker. One of the questions I had, Paul, was why the YouTube channel now? Why not 2 years ago or 5 years ago?
Yeah, so it's good. It's a good question. I mean, I think the thing is, my company Meta, we're here in Georgia, right? We're in the Atlanta area. I've spent a lot of time making a lot of money for a lot of people, right? And at a certain point, I realized it was time for me to take my intellectual property that I care about. You know, I'm trying to do this in a way that has some element of humility, but to be fair, you know, I've succeeded here. You know, I've had a lot of specific. I just had one thing that I've done that's been successful. You know, I've done a number of platinum selling video games, probably 6 platinum selling video games that I've worked on. I have worked on reviving the content in Marvel, you know, wow. Ninja Turtles. I've done a lot of things over time. And so I wanted to do it for myself, for my company here. Well, I have some amazing people. So as myself, Scott Conley, our producer, Sarah Boyd, who's our CEO. She's amazing, and she really guides our company. And Emma Loggins, who's our vice president of marketing, and she's incredible. She kind of tells the world, you know, what we do. So Sarah and Emma got together and said, you know, as a company, it's important for us to be able to kind of show people the stuff. I mean, everybody wants to see this. They want to understand the story behind the origin of Wolverine. They want to see all the new stuff. One thing that I'm very high on when we go into film production, I'm going to put cameras up in the corner and people can watch our production. We'll live stream it, like every part of the production. Because it's going to make any difference in sales if I do a $2.5 million film and people already know kind of what's going to be in it. They're going to have creative ownership. The fans are going to believe in our project and go find it if they think that they were there all the way down the line. So I feel like it's actually even a good marketing thing to allow access to us. So there's the studio, right? We want to show people what we do. We want to give them a bit of our wisdom. We want to learn from them. We may occasionally live stream. We got some new technologies we want to showcase. But more important, we're going to do some fun things, right? We're going to do fuck nuts, and we're going to do some fun things, and we'll go behind the scenes. And let me tell you something, guys. I have so many anecdotes from my life. Someone was talking earlier on about like whether or not I should do a, you know, an autobiography. Well, I can tell you 1,000 stories from my life that will just make you laugh and go, wow, that's incredible. I can't believe that happened. You know, pick one, right? And we'll probably tell, I literally can pick, you know, what do you want to hear about? My wife, golf, pick one, right? Which one makes you laugh? Because I'll tell you something funny, you know? So, you know, we're going to be doing all that stuff on Meta Studios, and that's why the YouTube channel right now, you know?
Very cool.
Actually, you know, that's a fascinating answer. The one thing is that in today's world, you know, you have that tool, YouTube. You know, there's other tools just like YouTube out there, and that's really fascinating. The world had to catch up to you, to your vision, so you can actually get it into the hands of the people without any filters.
Absolutely. So that what we do on our channel, on the YouTube channel, is really honest. That we have fun. That we do little vignettes and we tell funny stories and we show. I mean, you know, just showing behind the scenes. I mean, you know, if I would, I'm gonna do this. I'll tell you the story of the red carpet event Ninja Turtles, where I took my grandmother to London and she met not the Queen, she met Queen. When Freddie was really sick and Brian May came up to me and said, I can't believe you brought your grandmother. And I'm like, my nan was like the Queen mother right in the middle of and we went to the BBC after party and everybody was all over. Elton John loved her, you know, and they couldn't believe I brought my grandmother. Like, who else am I going to bring? And I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. So, you know, like stories in life, just, you know, I don't sweat any of that stuff. Like just having fun and doing honest things. Like, why not? Right. So,
yeah.
Fatal J asked before, what was your experience with Top Cow?
Top Cow, good actually, because people thought that I didn't work for the dark. I mean, I did the Darkness with them, right, and it did really well. People assumed that I had stopped working with them at a certain point. It's like, listen, I did both Darkness video games, so I worked on the Darkness for about 6 years plus. You know, so I worked with Top Cow for a while. Actually, they asked me for a while, you know, if I would come in and work on Witchblade, and I said, I'll be honest with you, I have no interest in writing a character where she transforms into a chick in a metallic bodysuit for no apparent reason. She's a New York police detective. So I pitched them really hard. I said, I'll write if you let me write her in t-shirt and jeans. And finally they gave in, and guess what got made into the TV show? The girl in the t-shirt.
Wow.
because that's what's interesting. Like, to me, it was an interesting story of a very attractive young woman who works in the NYPD. Because at that point, you'd have a lot of difficulty, a lot of frustration, a lot of sexism, a lot of stuff, and so she would deal with that, right? And that's what I wrote about in Witchblade. So, you know, I did.
Sorry, that's funny that you say Witchblade TV series, because up here in Toronto, I actually touched the prosthetics at a modeling company where they were actually making the Witchblade gauntlet, and they said,
Right.
"Oh, that's awesome! This is going to be great." You said, "Yeah, I know, but we're going with an actual armor."
Yeah.
I mean, they had the one that looked exactly like out of the comic book done, and I go like, "This is going to be great. This is going to be fantastic." Yeah, he goes, "Yeah," and then he points over to the right or left. I forget. He goes, "Yeah, but that's the one they're going with."
Well, the silver bodysuit would be impossible, right? What's the point, right? It was just an idea. I mean, that version of Witchblade was so they could draw half-naked women. I mean, that's basically it, right?
Yeah.
There's no inherent storytelling value in that, particularly. It looks good, great, okay, but we think we've ascertained what I feel about something that looks good has a substance. So in the end, interesting story. And by the way, she's gorgeous and beautiful, and she wears t-shirts and jeans, and she looks great. So you still get her to be attractive. Just don't have her in some gratuitous bodies. You know?
Yeah.
She's not running around.
PJ, is there another question?
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of already answered this question a little bit, but how therapeutic for the reader is it? How therapeutic are some of your comics for the reader, as far as dealing with issues in their own lives?
All right.
I think as a psychologist, I think that you are doing some like one-on-one with a reader, really.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story, right? It's sort of an anecdote. Again, it's actually something that comes from one of the ones that we've got up on our studio. So about 2008, I was speaking at the inaugural CUSP conference in Chicago, and I actually mentioned this anecdote. So I'll tell it again. I'll paraphrase it. A number of years ago, just before CUSP, I had been writing for Marvel, and I was doing a signing. And as I'm sitting there in the line, so they would cap it, right? So I'd be signing, and then fans would line up, and then there'd be one guy at the end, and he'd hold up a sign like this, and I'm last in line, and he would just kind of hang out. So we do the signing, and during the signing, I got like a spidey sense, and I could tell that there was some guy over the other side of the ropes, and he had been looking at me the whole time. And I just thought, maybe he's a bit awkward, you know? And I've never been a person that I want to make sure that I connect directly with fans, and especially people that are struggling with nervousness or whatever. Sometimes people come up and meet me and just be so nervous. I'm like, it's okay. So one of the things that I've learned to do over the years is crazy stuff. I actually mentioned this last night. I like to remember a fan's name and then say hi to them the next year with their name. Like, all right, Colin, how you doing? And they're like, I can't believe you know my name. I'm like, I remember you from last year. And it changes their world, right? And buy a fan a drink instead of let them. They want to buy you a drink, buy them a drink instead. And it's cool, right? It allows us to connect in a different way. We see each other at eye level. So anyway, this guy's standing over the other side, and I'll get to the point in a minute, but you'll understand why I told this anecdote. And I said, hey, buddy, do you want a signature? And he said, yeah. And he sort of looks around like me. And I said, yeah, do you want a signature? And he's like, yeah. And so I said, come inside the ropes, man. It's okay. And so he comes inside, and he had a book, and it was an issue of Hellblazer, and he was holding it in both hands like this. And he comes up with it, and he's trembling. And you always know when they're because they're holding one book in both hands. And so he comes up, and he puts it in front of me, and I said, do you want me to sign it for you? And he said, no. And I thought, okay. And I said, here you go. And I gave it to him, and he just picked it up and walked off. Didn't say thank you. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Well, he wrote me a letter, an email 2 weeks later, and he said, Mr. Jenkins, I don't know if you remember me. But then he told me who he was, and I was like, oh, my God. So when I was working on Hellblazer, that particular issue, when it came out, I got a letter from the editor, and all it said on the outside was, wow. And it was a letter from that individual, 10 years earlier. And he dealt with a lot of mental health issues. He was actually suicidal. His father had died, and his brother and his sister-in-law had had a baby in the same week. And he was struggling to reconcile his feelings, and he didn't know what to do about it. So he resolved, because of his grief over his father and the fact that he dealt with a lot of mental health issues like depression, he was going to end his own life. And he got himself set up, this is mid-90s, he got himself set up in a car, and he put the exhaust pipe in the car, and he thought, I don't know how to kill myself. And so he went to the comic store it was a Wednesday, and he went to the comic store to buy some comics so he could read comics as he died. He gets the comic stack. He actually liked Hellblazer, picked up my comic first when he turned the engine on, and he picked up my comic. And it so happened that that particular issue of Hellblazer was literally around a person who dies in a family and a child who is born in the same moment. And he realized this happens to everybody, and he turned the engine off. So I didn't save his life.
Oh my God.
But he
That's quite a story.
managed. And I have always said to people that, I have a responsibility. It's not just a privilege to do what I do. I have a responsibility because so many people, I'm their best friend. When you do a lot of comics, you're one of their best friends. You come in their life, all the people are very awkward, socially awkward or something like that. They're misfits, they're comic fans and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, look, I'm one of their best mates, And so, it's important that I understand that, and that I recognize it, and that I'm a friend to them, and that I will never make fun of them at a convention, or that I'll be accommodating. Those kind of things are personally very important to me. But I learned my lesson really early, because when that guy told me that, when he wrote to me and said, I was the guy who chose not to end his own life because I had to read a comic of yours that dealt with themes that I was dealing with, I'm like, that reminds me of my responsibility to the fans.
And that brings me to my next question. How did it feel when you were given the reins of something like Spider-Man or the Hulk? That feels like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
Right? No, I'm like, cool, right? How did it feel to take over Hellblazer after Garth Ennis, right? Garth was the definitive, and I'm like, great,
yeah,
cool. It's comics, man. Like, calm down. So how did it feel to take over Spider-Man? Great, cool. Stories, it's comics. Calm down. Inhumans, Origin, and Wolverine felt the same. It's like, my job is to be entertaining and to do well. I'm not worried about it, If I was worried about it, it would probably affect the work. It wouldn't be so good. So hopefully I'm not worried about it for a good reason,
Yeah. Do you feel like you're so far along, like there's so much continuity with the characters anyways at this point that, I guess that brings up another question too. I don't mean to kind of segue into something else, but do you feel like the never ending continuity of comics kind of gets tiresome after a while? And would you like to just tell stories, beginning, middle, end?
Yeah, well, it's why I don't do mainstream comics anymore, I think. I did it for a while when they were in Chapter 11 bankruptcy and they didn't know what to do. So I specialized in single issue stories, thematic stories. So a lot of my stuff was single issue after single issue after single issue. And then at a certain point, around about 2003 or 4, they said, we want 5-issue series. I'm like, really? They were quite popular. And then marketing started telling us what the editorial needed to be. And at a certain point, that's probably not for me. And I remember I was on Spider-Man and they had a Captain America crossover, something or other. I can't even remember what it was. And I went, no, I don't think this probably isn't me anymore. We've gone past the repairing Marvel and getting stuff done. We've done the Century, we've done Origin, we've done the stuff. Clearly, we're now at a different phase, and that was probably a year or so before. We did Civil War, which worked out pretty well. I worked on that, and then I did Civil War Frontlines, and then right after that, you could tell it had changed. So I think the one and dones and the self-contained stories are super important. I have nothing to do with all that crossover stuff. I don't even know. I couldn't even know where to begin. It's just not me, right? It's for somebody else. So I'm glad they got someone else doing it now. That's for the best.
Yeah. Sorry, PJ. I didn't mean to.
No, please. You guys have been really awesome. And please, did you want to ask something else, John?
Oh no, go ahead. I know you got.
Yeah, I just have a couple more questions here. Like, what's without divulging any of your ideas, what what are things that like are out there on the horizon that you're not involved yet, but you know you want to do, you want to get to sometime? Are there things out there that you know you want to do?
Yeah, yeah. So a big thing would be, first of all, we have a slate of independent films that we're going to do with Meta, and so we're building up on the investment and all of that. We're working on this on a daily basis, right? So hopefully, wish us luck, guys, right? Like, a big thing for us to some extent, and it actually goes back to the YouTube thing. Why the YouTube, right? Well, because my CEO, Sarah, tells us as a company, we need to guide our company a certain way. When we go to investors, there are certain, we want to be making content. So making content for me, what do I want to do? Well, I want to wake up and make stuff and go to bed having made stuff. And that really should be what I do. I just ended up, I was actually meeting, as I feel like I'm name dropping. I was actually sitting with the president of Pinewood today, Frank Patterson.
Oh, wow.
And when we sat today, Frank and I were talking for a little while. And I told him something that I had heard about Orson Welles, an anecdote about him that, he, near the end of his life, someone asked him, do you have any regrets? And he said, yeah, I do. And my regret is that I should have spent 90% of my time making stuff and 10% trying to make stuff. And it was the other way around. And I have a lot of regrets about that. And I feel that pain, that I should be just waking up and making stuff and going to bed having made stuff. And so that's the goal. That's what's going to make me happy, is to bring Meta Studios to a point where all we do is make stuff. You get a character and you're like that. Well, I want 240 characters and they show up on your feed every so often. You go, great. That one didn't hit today, but the general thing of them, and I want to buy that T-shirt, right? Reset. I want that science fiction because it's a very meaningful story. I want to make our other independent films. We have a huge appetite at Meta Studios. We really are interested in cross media, which is my thing, because there are very few people that do what I do. I happen to have made games, animation, film, comics, television, video games. I'm writing some novels. I'm doing, literally, I've consulted on the future of storytelling, and I'm doing a TEDx talk this week. So on Saturday, I will be doing a TED talk on the future of storytelling. So it's past, present, and future. It's all this stuff. Check us out. I think Ted Emery, by the way. I don't know if there's a link, but go for it. I'm sure there's one somewhere.
A link to that, yeah.
Yeah, good. We're about cross-media development and production. That's what Meta does. And at the same time, we care about like mentoring and nurturing people. So Meta, META, is an acronym that stands for media, which is what we do. Education, which is what we very much care about. Technology, which is what sets us apart. And advancement, which is building up a community of creative people and elsewhere. So media, education, technology, and advancement. That's what we want to do. I want to wake up and do that every day for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Sounds like fun. That's
sounds like, well, you see those eyes. You see the lines under my eyes, right? Yeah. I'm actually 23.
That's interesting that you say that.
George, is there I think is there any other questions you have?
Yeah, I do have
George,
a question.
you wanted to ask?
How much sleep do you get? You sound like you only get the minimum sleep in your because you're just charged up. You're ready to go.
I think you've been very generous with your time. And is there anything else you want to plug besides the Meta Studios? Everybody, please do go ahead and subscribe to Meta Studios.
Well, I'll answer. I can hear George's question. So, how much sleep do I get?
Yeah. That's the question.
I've never needed a lot, to be honest, although I think my face is starting to show it, all the lines in my face. I've never needed a lot of sleep, so oh well, right? I have like so much energy to do stuff. When we go make when we're working on AXANAR, for example, like I'm the first on set, last off, every day, running around, being the most energetic person. And then when we're finished, I go home and I cry myself to sleep on my big pillow, right? I have energy for it. And so I feel so I married an ex-mother. He cries himself to sleep on his great big pillow. So I love doing what I do, right? And I think it shows. And I love us doing what we do at Meta. We're going to make, like, if we're going to do a parody of Star Trek, we're going to do this funny character and his crew, right? It's going to be, I promise it'll be funny because there'll be craft behind it. It won't just be like we threw a bunch of stuff together. Like that's what the lines under my eyes are, is the craft of this work. Making sure that AXANAR is going to be amazing, not just that it shows up. The whole point is to make it wonderful. The whole point is to make our stuff great, right? Because you guys, honestly, PJ, you guys, the one thing that I definitely would adhere to, because you're Orville Nation, right? And so you like the Orville. Why? Because to me, that's the kind of show that I look at, that I say that has some craft behind it, just like Cheers did back in the day, just like Seinfeld did after a while. Just like, a lot of these shows have a little bit of craft and guile behind them, and there was a time in the mid-90s, I think, that history will look at, where when Seinfeld would come out on a Thursday, everybody went home for the when it came out, because it actually represented content that people wanted. So you look at the Orville and you go, that's how to do it. That's the kind of show that means something, right? The kind of content that means something, like amazing movies, films that actually try really hard. I saw 1917, and it may or may not have hit. I know that when I saw the moment that meant something, and I don't know if there's a spoiler, the Allies, we beat the Germans in the First World War. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. But the fact is, you get to the end of the film, and all that happens is that he sits up against a tree, this poor soldier, and he's just been through hell, and he's managed to do what he needed to do, and he sits up against a tree, and he opens his backpack, and he pulls out a picture of his wife, and he opens it, and it says, "Please come home."
Yeah.
And I look at that art form, I think of my 3 great-grandfathers bleeding out, and I think, I want to see that film. I want 1917. I want to bring that kind of storytelling to the world, because people will recognize themselves. When they hold up a piece of stuff that I make, they're holding a mirror to their condition, and that's what I want to give them.
Sometimes people in North America don't realize that having the First and Second World War being fought on your home ground in Europe gives a very different perspective than that maybe people in North America have.
Yeah, we have a very kind relationship with America from where I come from, because we always what was it about the Americans? They're overpaid, oversexed, and they're over here. That's the problem. But we love the Americans, right? Because they, that we needed them, right? Like they came. You have a generation of young men that came from America and fought for the freedoms of other people 3,000 miles away from their homes.
Yeah.
Right. That's an incredible sacrifice that they made. At the same time, it cannot be ignored the fact that, my country, my mum was a little girl when she was bombed, So, that brings about PTSD. I mean, she was bombed regularly. And she said when the V1 rockets came over, they were called doodle bugs, right? They called them doodle bugs. And it's great. And then motor would go, and then the motor would cut out. And then they would go, oh, look, it's going to land. And they would go hide under an Anderson shelter. And that was great until they came out with the V2 rocket, which just exploded on top of you right next to you with no warning. And at that point, people were just, dying. So when you look at the experience of the wars, we've been through it differently. But I would say it's a shared experience with America and Great Britain as well. It's just that you guys always show up late.
You touched upon my last question, Paul. Do you have any connection, because this is the Norville channel? Do you have any connection? Do you socially with the Orville production or staff or Seth or?
Not that I know of, but I would not put it past me. I mean, literally, like I said, I was talking to Frank Patterson over at Pinewood, and we, as always happens, we know 10 of the same people. I would imagine so. I imagine that I probably know people all over there at some point. I think there's a couple of people I actually do. I'm aware that I know. So yeah, I know a couple of people over there. But generally, I mean, it's Hollywood, and this business is the biggest small town in the world. So generally, you sort of show up and you go, I remember you from such and such, So yeah, we everyone knows each other to some extent. You'd be surprised, right? And because I've got that memory where I do tend to remember a bunch of stuff, I tend to see a person go, I remember when we met, it was such and such. So you never know where someone's come from. You meet someone when they're 20 and they're just starting out, and then you meet them again when they're 33 and they're like, dude, you encouraged me, Mr. Jenkins, to keep going with my comic book, and I just published my 5th one, and now I'm working as a visual effects artist or something. I'm like, great. So always be kind, be kind to each other.
They watch Seinfeld on the bridge and on the Orville, and maybe someday they'll be watching Captain Fucknuts on the bridge.
Well, I know that on Fucknuts, we're going to be. So my football Crystal Palace, I'm like an evangelist because the Crystal Palace, we suck. We're like the Cleveland Browns. So basically, every time that my ship is parked in orbit, we'll be watching the English Premier League in the future. Like literally, and I guarantee it'll be Crystal Palace.
That's great.
Nice.
Well, Paul, thank you. You've been very, very generous with your time. I want to thank everybody who's hung in here for quite a while with us. Stogie, Christie, thank you for wrenching Christie and Adega, Stephen Klein, Vorian 76, Captain Robert April, and everybody who's been great troll, everybody who's been in here before. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, George, for co-hosting. Thank you all to all the panel. Thanks to John Talks. Everybody subscribe to John. John has one of the best shows on the internet, seriously. And it was an honor. It was a true honor to have you and Anti-Trekker and Comics, all of you guys here tonight. So thank you, Paul, and everybody. You guys have a great night.
All right, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you.